Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spaceflight Now LabPadre joint live coverage, the second test flight of SpaceX's fully integrated Starship rocket. The teams here in Texas are aiming to launch the world's most powerful rocket on what is dubbed Orbital Flight Test 2, or OFT-2, during a 20-minute window that opens up at 7 a.m. Central Time. For all of you joining from around the world, that is 1300 UTC. I'm Will Robinson Smith with Spaceflight Now. Great to be with all of you this morning from Starbase here in South Texas. I'll be providing commentary throughout the fueling, launch, and flight of the Starship launch vehicle, but I am far from alone from this mission. We have a great suite of guests joining in the conversation in this partnership between LabPadre and Spaceflight Now. We'll be talking about a whole range of topics from the road to this second flight of Starship, what we're anticipating with this launch, and what comes next, both for the Starship program as well as Starbase writ large. Before we really get off to the races, though, is a bit of housekeeping. This is a simulcast between LabPadre and Spaceflight Now. We have our wonderful moderators helping keep pace with the live chats for both streams, as well as the super chats and members joining in the fun as well. So we will do our best to bring your thoughts and comments into this coverage. We want you to be a part of all the excitement here in South Texas. And our moderators are going to help us keep that flowing. So the easiest way to be a part of this conversation is by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will it help us more easily be able to keep up with what's coming in, but you'll also be helping to support our coverage. We are by channel membership on both LabPadre and Spaceflight Now's channels. So if you haven't already, consider being a channel member. That really is a big help supporting, especially these big launch opportunities like we have in front of us today. Both channels have a number of membership perks like custom multi-streams that you see on LabPadre's channel, our 4K streams, and of course, member discounts on merch both ways. I'd like to thank the folks that are helping to make this morning possible. It takes a small village to get this operation up and running. On the Spaceflight Now side, Stephen Young is the man in the chair in Florida, helping to steer the ship, and Adam Bernstein is on the ground here in Texas, helping to provide tracking and doing some still photography. LabPadre, thanks to Lucid and Rusty Buckets, as well as Chief, who is also getting some great launch pictures when Starship takes off. Our thanks also to all the camera operators, as I mentioned, but bears repeating certainly, to the moderators for both channels, and thanks to Sapphire Condominiums and Isla Grande Beach Resort. We really want to thank this team that is really all around the world helping to make this launch happen and bring this great coverage to you at home. So our kudos to them as we are off and running. We're now T-minus 1 hour, 55 minutes, 45 seconds till the planned liftoff of the Starship launch vehicle. At the 2-hour out mark, the SpaceX launch director was set to conduct the poll for the start of propellant load. If that go-ahead is given, fueling will begin with tanking operations on the Superheavy booster. T-minus 1 hour, 37 minutes. As a note, if you have not been with us for live launch coverage in the recent past, SpaceX is not issuing mission audio for the majority of the fueling process. We're expecting to start hearing from them about 35 minutes out. But we do have a team here who has been watching the testing over the past 7 months since the first launch. And of course, all the operations here at Starbase. So we are quite adept as best we can be to know what to expect for fueling, and we'll be letting you know as we get through the process what we're watching for as fueling commences. Of course, SpaceX is running the countdown both through its operation here at Starbase, and they also have support from their control room at the headquarters at Hawthorne, California. Again, SpaceX is targeting liftoff of its Starship rocket at 7 a.m. Central Time, 1300 UTC for those joining from around the world. That is the start of their 20-minute launch window. For those who may have been tracking this mission, you may recall, though, that the launch window was 2 hours long when they were targeting liftoff on Friday morning. Well, SpaceX hasn't explicitly stated why this morning's attempt was so dramatically shorter. We believe it is likely due to the heightened travel that will be happening this weekend as folks zip across the United States, getting to be with their loved ones ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday this Thursday. If for some reason SpaceX is not able to launch Starship today, indications like road closures and other public warning systems suggest that they may have another backup opportunity potentially on Sunday. We're now T minus 1 hour, 50 minutes on the dot before liftoff of Starship. As we get close to the start of fueling at T minus 1 hour, 37 minutes, I want to go ahead and bring in one of our first additional commentators who all of you on the LabPadre side of the equation are quite familiar. Lab joining us.
Howdy, everybody.
Morning. How are you doing, sir?
For being with us this morning out here at the Raptor Roost as we're waiting for this IFT-2 launch. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And also wanted to give a special thanks to Phil, the Whiz Kid, for being my right-hand man out here and being the brawn of the operations. Uh, yeah, I'm excited, man. Can't wait to see this thing pop off.
Yeah, lots been moving and shaking here at Starbase since the last launch back in, gosh, I can't believe it was already 7 months ago, back in April. Does it feel like it's been that long, or has it kind of flown by with all the changes that have been happening?
Well, as Phil told me the other day, sometimes it feels like 7 months, sometimes it feels like 7 years, sometimes it feels like 7 days. It's just there's so much going on out here. The way SpaceX moves so quickly, time flies down here in Starbase.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we've obviously seen a lot of evidence of some of the big changes that they've made with the water dealer system. I mean, with the stacking and destacking, we've seen plenty of views of the ring that'll support hot staging later today. What are you most looking forward to with this newly iterated version of Starship?
I think what everybody's looking for, including me, is stage separation. We want to see stage separation, and of course, we want to see it reach all the way to the Pacific.
And talking a little bit about what we saw as far as the fueling operations ahead of time before we started the stream, you can see a little bit of venting near the tank farms. Can you just talk about what we're looking at right here?
Right now, what we're seeing is the orbital tank farm venting. They are getting the propellants ready to load into Starship and Superheavy, which should be happening, like you said, about an hour and 37 minutes before uh, the window opens. Uh, we're to the we're looking to the west right now, and the tank farm has been venting for just about 45 minutes, I think.
We're at T minus 1 hour, 45 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. Do have word from SpaceX in the last couple of moments here. Say all systems and weather are go for this second integrated flight test of Starship. So good indication that we'll get fueling underway. That process will begin with the tanking of the booster in less than 10 minutes.
So we're about 7 minutes from prop loads.
The T-minus 1 hour, 43 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the weather forecast coming into today's flight opportunity, the greater Brownsville area, it's been pretty pleasant for much of this week. Good weather looks like it will extend into this morning during the launch window. While we don't have a formal launch weather forecast as we do at the Cape in Florida, weather we're seeing from Apple Weather shows no rain in the forecast or any noteworthy cloud cover, which is certainly good. There's been just a very light breeze this morning, about 3 miles per hour, with wind gusts of only up to 5 miles per hour. So very mild start to the morning here in South Texas. For those who were watching coverage of the Starlink 6-28 mission just after midnight on the East Coast, weather here in Texas looking far better than it was previously over there. Now T-minus 1 hour, 41 minutes, 19 seconds and counting. We're coming up on the start of propellant load. That'll begin at T-minus 1 hour, 37 minutes exactly. So before we get to that first big milestone, let's go ahead and step through the countdown timeline, let you know what we're watching for throughout the rest of this morning. As I mentioned, we already passed that 2-hour mark when the go for propellant load will be given by the SpaceX launch director. Fueling begins, as we said, at T-minus 1 hour, 37 minutes, with both liquid oxygen and liquid methane loading onto the Superheavy booster. That'll be followed at T-minus 1 hour, 17 minutes, when fuel load liquid methane will begin on ship 25. A few minutes later, at T-minus 1 hour, 13 minutes, LOX load on ship 25 will get underway. The Starship upper stage is a propellant capacity of 1,200 tons or 2.6 million pounds. For the booster, it's 3,400 tons or 7.5 million pounds. Full fueling operation is going to continue for quite some time until T-minus 19 minutes, 40 seconds, when the Raptor engine chill begins. As we've seen with many of the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets, SpaceX does this engine chill down sequence by pulling a small bit of propellant through the plumbing and turbo pumps to protect the Raptor engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. In the final 10 seconds, the new flame deflector will be activated. Documents from the Federal Aviation Administration assessment of the new water dealer system show that it can produce up to 358,000 gallons of water, which is pushed through the steel plate beneath the orbital launch mount. Finally, in the last 3 seconds, the Raptor ignition sequence begins. And unlike a Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy mission where liftoff occurs at T-0, liftoff is actually coming up at T+2 seconds. And as I mentioned, we do have a lot of folks who are going to be hopping on the mic with me. And we have a couple of great ones joining us right now. We have Zachary Golden from CSI Starbase and Marcus House also joining us live. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Good to have you with us on this very important mission for SpaceX. How are you both doing?
Hey, how we going, everybody?
Yeah, great to have you both on board. So obviously you've both been keenly watching all of the developments that have been happening throughout the course of, well, really the years leading up to this point, and certainly within the last several months as we've been getting ready for this second integrated flight test of Starship. I guess question to you both, and you can answer in turn. What's been sort of the most pivotal pieces of the development getting to this day that you've both been tracking, and really what do you have your eye on this morning? Marcus, we'll start with you.
Well, probably let you go. Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, look, one of the things that I think has been really quite extraordinary to watch primarily has been the water-cooled steel plate system. So, you know, in my mind, that's the super critical thing. If that doesn't go well, if there's damage to it, you know, that's really quite a big problem. So we want to see that go well. We want it to be able to be, you know, rapidly reused. So we don't want to see damage there. If it can get at least a few kilometers or miles downrange, then this is a great first step. My two things, obviously, the cooled steel plate and then hot stage separation. Those are the two things for me. If we can get past both those two things reasonably successfully, then that's great. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with that. I think maybe the next most important thing is just overall booster performance. That's probably what I'm personally most concerned with, because you know, really everything starts with the booster and ends there as well, as far as the last flight was concerned. So you know, I think SpaceX has done a lot to improve on the performance from the last flight. And you know, one of the big things I would say is probably the performance of the Raptor engines. So you know, we've seen a lot of work to make sure that you know, they're not, if they do lose Raptor engines, that they're not taking each other out in the process. I think that was a big thing that we noticed during the last flight, was that, you know, the tendency of a Raptor engine to explode and then take out its neighbor was a pretty big issue. And beyond that, issues with like fires within the actual aft section of the booster. So I think that one of the major things that they were working on after the last flight was to make sure that they're not going to have a repeat of that. And, you know, to kind of boost up the vehicle's ability to shield itself from those type of explosions, and also to you know, incorporate some sort of very large fire suppression system to make sure that they're not having, you know, explosive mixtures form within the aft section of the vehicle. So I think if we see engines go out, it may not necessarily be something to worry about, but you know, making sure that there's not engines taking each other out is going to be one of the big things that I'm looking for this time around.
And speaking of looking out for things, we are now at T-1 hour, 34 minutes, 37 seconds. Tanking has started on the Super Heavy booster. Take us through this process. Obviously, you know, with the capacity of the tanks on Super Heavy, this is going to take the longest out of the full operation. What are you watching for as far as the tanking procedure goes? Have things really changed a lot between fueling from IFT-1 to IFT-2?
Well,
I wouldn't
for the
think
most
they've changed a lot. No.
Yeah, I mean, for the most
Yeah,
part,
you're right, Zach.
everything is pretty much about the same. I mean, they have added, as far as I can tell, maybe like one little thing to the process, which comes close to the end. It's something that's actually very similar to what they do on Falcon 9. So on Falcon 9, you kind of hear like one of the last call outs is I think it's called ground gas closeout, which is
Yeah.
basically purging the propellant system or the propellant loading system. And that's something that they had never done before on for Starship, which was always interesting to me. So, you know, it's basically you have I would say about, you know, half a mile of propellant system or a propellant loading system, which previously they kind of like left full. So you like you load your liquid oxygen and liquid methane onto the booster and ship, and you know, once that was done, they kind of just left it full, which was I think something that's pretty rare for a launch system. So this time around, it seems like they actually have a system in place to use liquid nitrogen to actually purge all of that out, which again is something that they do on Falcon 9. And the goal is, you know, if you have leaking valves on your actual QD system, that you're not inviting fires after the fact, you know. So once that QD hood closes, you don't want flames going on the inside and having fuel leaking and causing explosions on that kind of stuff. So other than that, I mean, you know, that's probably one of the only things that I've seen. Next time around on the next launch, we'll probably see a dramatic change, I think, with propellant loading, as they've kind of gotten set up for increasing the capacity of their pumping system. So I think right now we'll probably be expecting about 90 minutes for propellant loading, and I believe next time around we'll probably be expecting about 45 minutes as they add in all of that additional capacity.
Yeah,
They've
Marcus,
got an extra two on each side, don't they? An extra two motors there ready to go that are kind of not quite hooked up yet, or the actual lines aren't hooked up. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess one of now that I think about it, a big thing is last time around they were powering the entire tank farm with generators. So they had trailer mounted generators.
Yeah,
Each of them were about like 2,000 horsepower, I want to say. And I think they were using about 5 of them. And in the last 6 months or so, they've converted all of Starbase over from running on generator power to now pulling power from Brownsville. So it's like 3-phase power from Brownsville. So this is the first time they've actually performed a launch with that actually having, I would say, a proper power system going over there. So, you know, the pumps that they were using to load propellant were kind of dependent on those generators, and the maximum output was limited as a result. So, you know, I think overall all of those systems have improved a little bit now that they have like a dedicated power running to them. So this is going to be interesting. We did see it during the wet dress rehearsal as well, so it should be about the same as that in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. That's a beautiful shot we've got on screen right there, by the way. Just beautiful. Just the way that all that, you know, all that mist is just sitting there floating on the ground. Spooky. It's almost spooky. It's a sight that I'll never get sick of seeing.
Yeah, we did have a good bit of fog rolling in overnight, so hopefully as we get closer to sunrise, some of that will burn off and it won't be obscuring our launch views from all around Starbase. Should be quite a show when it does launch.
Gets quite hard to sort of see the real activity there from the subcoolers. So yeah, that's a great shot though.
And Zach, we were talking a little bit off cam before we started the stream last night about some of the really robust support that's been added underneath the orbital launch mount. You just talk about the reinforcement that SpaceX has done, and you know why that was such an important modification to be made, and hopefully we won't see nearly any type of destruction like we saw with the first integrated flight test.
Yeah, I would say this is probably something worth repeating multiple times throughout the live stream. But you know, that was definitely a major thing with the last launch, was obviously the crater that was excavated underneath the structure. And you know, I think that one of the things they mentioned last time was the amount of data that they gathered, and a lot of people are kind of wondering, like what kind of data can you get from a crater in the ground? But that is actually really valuable information. I think that the launch mount was probably initially designed for 29 engines, and that would be 29 Raptor 1 engines. And in between Booster 4, which never flew, and Booster 7, they upgraded the Raptors from about 185 tons of thrust up to 230 tons of thrust. So you multiply that difference by 33 and you have quite a large difference. So I don't think they were prepared for that at all necessarily. And they maybe thought they were, but the upgrade to the foundation that they made as a result of the outcome of that launch, I think is pretty massive. They went from, I want to say about a meter of concrete underneath the launch mount to about 4 meters. So it's pretty insane, reinforced concrete. They have very large pilings going about 40 feet down into the ground underneath that concrete. So, I'm going to knock on wood here, but I would say that the outcome that we saw from the last launch is close to impossible this time around. I mean, it's a very, very massive difference as far as actual support on the ground. So, having the steel plate on top of that is kind of an added bonus. I think personally that had the actual foundation that exists now been in place previously, they probably could have gotten away with a single launch without having the water system. They probably would have performed the way they were expecting it to, with just needing to replace it after it was over without actually, having a catastrophic failure of it. So I think that it's going to be a vast improvement on what we saw last time around.
Certainly hope so. It's going to be pretty wild to see that. We've seen the static fires. The static fires have looked extremely, extremely successful, really. There was even debate. In fact, I think, Zack, you and I chatted about it a little bit, so, debating whether, how much of that water was being instantly sort of, flashed to dry steam. And, it seems much higher. In fact, I think you were probably the more correct person in the debate now that I think about it. But it's extraordinary. The idea is that this is kind of instantly sort of flashing, like over 90% of this water. That's a great sign. You can imagine the amount of energy that gets lost in that. And that's energy that's not making it to do more damage elsewhere. So, it's going to be really fun to see. The other thing I think is going to be really interesting to watch is this new thrust vectoring control that's now electric instead of the hydraulic for the booster. That is ship, as far as I'm aware, still hydraulic. But the booster itself, that's a big change. We saw HPUs exploding all over the place in the last launch, which was not fun to see, especially at such low altitude. And and subsequently they kind of lost control of the entire vehicle right at that point. Hard to steer it with no thrust vectoring control. So the electric's going to be hopefully a very, very big plus, a big bonus, and we hope to see those all working perfectly. We don't want to see engines out all over the place this time. I guess my hope for orbit, I don't know. I'd love to give like a guess, like a percentage guess. I'd say 50% orbit. I'm hoping it's more than 50% past hot staging, but it'll be very, very interesting. I mean, they've done so many tests and they've had a long time to sort of test out, especially through the last month of environmental review and all this kind of stuff, which, some people have felt it's been a little bit frustrating. I personally think it's all warranted and, it's kind of needed, even if it does frustrate people. But I feel that the FAA and the FWS are very much working intricately with SpaceX to get all these things done. So, although the government process can be just a tad frustrating, it's more of the nature of government anything. It's not. I don't think there's any conspiracies. There's no government officials trying to intentionally hold up a SpaceX launch. I really think that it's just everybody did a great job to get this done, and they actually did it quite quickly, really, when you consider when they started as well.
Yeah,
the fact
Marcus,
that
I
they
was just
started
about
maybe a bit late.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that, that once the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service got going after it got
Mhm.
the final biological assessment from the FAA, they really hit the ground running, and a process that they had, up to 135 days, they were able to complete all that in just about 27 days and turn it back over to the FAA to dot the last of the T's or dot the I's and
Yeah.
cross the T's. And here we are
Yeah,
today.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's the thing because, many many people out there jump to conclusions. Oh, I can't believe the FWS has taken this long. They haven't even started doing this yet. It's like, well, I don't believe that they could start until they had the approvals and the information to start it. So, anyway, I don't want to go too far into that because it's all kind of mostly nonsense. But, in my mind, they got the whole thing done really quite quickly. And, I think that they should all be proud of the job they've done. And frankly, it's a very understaffed area. These are areas where we've seen the hearings recently about where SpaceX saying, look, we urge the government to double the capability of the FAA and FWS or what have you, because that's where the limitation is. It's in the fact that the commercial space industry is ramping up and the FAA employment hasn't ramped up with it, as far as I understand. So, yeah, I think everybody's done the best job they could. I always find it quite frustrating to sort of see people hanging these issues on this as if it's an intentional disruption. I really don't believe it is.
Yeah, to add on to that a little bit, I think the actual Fish and Wildlife report that came out gave us a little more insight into what went into that process.
Oh, absolutely.
And, we saw a pretty good amount of data that was contained within that report. I think it was about 100 pages long. And on one of the pages, they actually showed all of the testing that they did for each of the tests of the actual deluge system. So I think they had an initial test where we saw actually the deluge test for the very first time, and a lot of people were kind of worried that maybe SpaceX didn't have clearance for this, but in reality, it actually turned out that they were doing multiple tests to actually see all of the different chloride content of the water on the outside of the launch mount. So they tested, I think I think I should pull this up here to see all the list of items that they were testing for. But they did a test for the very first time in the activation. I think they did another one a few days later, which from our side, we saw that it was a full pressure test. And they did one for each of the two static fires and then a fifth one during the wet dress rehearsal. And each of those times they were gathering data to actually measure how each of the different components that were detected within the water, they were measuring that each time. So it was interesting to see all of that. And that was one of those things where it's like, oh, why didn't you guys start this earlier? And they did start it early. They were out there for each of those tests and gathering the data that they needed. And at that point, after the final one, the wet dress rehearsal, it really came down to analyzing everything and actually forming a report. So I think that report that did come out gave us a lot of insight onto all that stuff going on in the background. And I still haven't had a chance to read through the entire thing myself, but it was a pretty massive amount of information.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the interesting points I that we'd sort of spotted was the amount of sort of ablation they sort of expect from the plate, and immediately there's sort of people jump on and saying, oh, they're going to be throwing metal everywhere, 190 pounds of metal. It's like, they're not throwing chunks of metal. That's like, atoms of metal, are going to go flying, and and across the whole plate. It's minuscule, it's probably works out to be hundreds of launches before they need any sort of refurbishment. So yeah, I mean, get a lot of detail in that. It's been really cool. I need to read it in more depth because I haven't sort of had a chance to really digest it.
Just want to make a point in time as we are continuing with the count now. T-minus 1 hour, 19 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. We're now less than 3 minutes away from the start of propellant load on ship 25. Zach, just want to take a look at the live stream here. You see a little bit of venting coming from the tower adjacent to Starship. You talk about what this vent is that we're seeing here.
So yeah, this vent coming off the tower is similar to one that actually happens on the launch mount. I can't tell right now based on this view if they're both happening at the same time, but I believe they are. Yeah, so this is part of the initial cooldown sequence. So they're actually chilling the cryogenic propellant loading lines. So up until this point, they're essentially empty, and once you start flowing all of that cryogenically cooled liquid through there, then it starts to immediately vaporize into a gas. So essentially, they just open up some valves and allow all that gas to escape, so that when they start loading liquid oxygen and liquid methane onto the vehicle, it's in a liquid form instead of sending all of that gas to the vehicle. So right now what we're seeing is liquid oxygen being boiled off right there, and essentially the same thing is happening on the liquid methane side, but they actually recapture all of that instead of just vent it to atmosphere. So yeah, we should see this both on the launch tower and the launch mount as well. And literally the moment this ends, they should be loading propellant onto both the booster and ship.
So for folks that are more familiar with, say, Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy missions, this is fairly similar to what we would call the big vent operation, which would happen just a little before T-minus 20 minutes from the transporter rector, the strong back. It sounds like a very similar operation as the feed lines are chilled before on a Falcon 9 before LOX loading would start on the Falcon 9's upper stage. Similar here before prop loading begins on ship 25, yeah?
Yeah, it's worth noting as well that, SpaceX tweeted out roughly 16 minutes ago that the Super Heavy propellant load is on the way. And I also think their live webcast is going to come up in just a few minutes by the looks of it. So, yeah, it seems to all be progressing wonderfully.
Yeah, I think SpaceX's webcast is coming up 35 minutes out, unless they've changed and decide to go early, which, we'll welcome the mission audio. That would be fabulous.
Yeah. I might be misinterpreting their tweet there. 35 minutes ahead of liftoff. Yeah. Okay. Ignore what I just said. Not a couple of minutes at all.
Yeah, and unfortunately that would be great if we could bring them up sooner and be able to listen into the loops. But since SpaceX made the call to take their mission audio off of YouTube, it's become a little more of an opaque process, certainly on the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy side of launch coverage. But
yeah, I was really hoping when we saw those few videos that they published just the other day, which were the first since June or July, something like that. I was really hoping that meant that they were going to stream on YouTube as well, because it's a big event. You want as big an audience as you can get, and why limit it? For something like this, it doesn't seem to be the case. I'm saddened to say. So yeah, it would be amazing if we could see that on YouTube as well, because they would have been streaming that in 4K, and I think typically we're not getting. Hopefully, we'll get at least 1080p out of X here. But yeah, the problem I have with the streams and it's probably due to my location, is that I can't seem to stream them at that quality. They seem to just come through at whatever lower quality they do. And I think a lot of people find that problem depending on where they are in the world. So, we don't typically get to watch it unless somebody else can re-stream it, at a higher quality, which, it'll be interesting to see if people do that.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest collective efforts that ever happened in the space community was all of us trying to bully SpaceX into keeping this on YouTube, but
didn't work, did it?
Yeah, no, we failed.
But that's why we're here, right? Is to bring this to the YouTube audience that perhaps isn't on X or wants to see the launch in a little bit higher quality. So we have lots of cameras pointed at the pad, and we'll give the folks a good show in the highest quality possible. So where SpaceX has created a vacuum, we're more than happy to step in and fill it. Yeah,
it's probably a bonus, if anything, for the streaming channels like yourselves. It's probably a good opportunity. So where are we at? We're about 1 hour 14 minutes or something away before this whole thing happens. And as we say, we've got that 20-minute launch window. So if they don't fly in that window, that's really it. Probably for the weekend, I would say. But yeah, it's going to be extraordinary to watch. I mean, I still find it interesting that I can look at an image, one of the great RGV images, or anyone from the ground, Starship Gazer, obviously the cameras from Lab here as well. Sometimes you'll just see that shot with a human there for scale, and it still blows my mind. I mean, I know very well how big it is. I've studied it enough, but sometimes you say, wow, that really is extraordinary, that shot. And I don't know, I just wish that we could somehow get that feeling of awe into the larger population, because when it comes down to it, it's fairly small when you sort of think even the biggest channels out there, your Scott Manleys, your Tim Dodds, they're sort of under that 2 million mark. And it's like, geez, is that the entire space enthusiast worldwide, fan base? It doesn't seem like very much, considering you can get many millions of subscribers for some shouty kids channel. It's
I mean, even
very frustrating.
Semi-related is, Star Wars. You got like about 100 million people who follow Star Wars, and only a fraction of those pay attention to actual space flight, which kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I get that maybe people don't appreciate the engineering quite as much as we all do and whatnot, but even for the big events, the big SpaceX launches and stuff. I mean, we saw extraordinary views for the Indian launch not so long ago. Many more views than SpaceX has ever got on anything ever, which was the biggest, I think, was Falcon Heavy. And just because, the Indian population's so monstrous. And it's like, wow, that really put that into perspective for me. If you look at Chandrayaan-3's launch and landing on the moon, go and look at the video numbers on that. It's like, wow, there's lots of space enthusiasts. It's just that, they're all different languages typically, and hard for us to reach. And they're obviously more passionate about their own commercial, their own industry there in India and whatnot. But that kind of blew my mind, that event. And even I don't think that I'd seen more activity on X than ever before either. Like, I was getting stupid impressions on around those few weeks. So it just goes to show the scale and, just the limit of reach. It's quite interesting. Anyway.
It certainly is. I think there's probably a number of ways that we can work to grow our domestic audience, for launches from the United States. And we'll note that briefly, we're now T-minus 1 hour, 11 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. LOX loading has been underway for about a minute and a half onto ship 25. So that was the last big fueling milestone that had yet to begin. So now tanking is underway on all 4 of the main propellant tanks for the Starship rockets. So we are well on our way towards hopefully getting a launch at 7 o'clock this morning. Do want to just make a broad ask for those who are enjoying the conversation and the live coverage this morning. If you haven't already and you're watching on either the LabPadre stream or Spaceflight Now, if you can go ahead and give this stream a like, it's a great way to support both of our channels, what we're doing here, and it allows the YouTube algorithm to spread the coverage, as we were just talking about, attracting more folks to big launches like this, and want to bring more folks into the conversation. Taking a quick peek at the super chats here. Want to thank Pete 2.0, one of the LabPadre YouTube super chats, with a $5 Australian dollar donation. Thank you so much, Pete. Saying fresh coffee for all, and I'm sure we are all being powered by caffeine this morning. I know I've got my energy drink by my side, keeping me as concentrated as I can for now. Michael E. Dennis with a $5 super chat from Lab Stream, saying, let's start the donation train, go Starship and SpaceX. And yes, really appreciate the super chats. Not only does it help bring more folks actively into the conversation talking about spaceflight, whether it's about this particular Starship launch, or if you have other questions that you'd all like to have us address, be sure to pose that in the super chat feature here. You also help support our coverage. We really appreciate that. Moving on down the line with Superman P. Witherspoon, with a $5 New Zealand dollar donation saying, will you have advertising in the last few minutes as NASA Spaceflight did with ITV-F1? No, we are not going to interrupt the most important part before the launch with advertising. I think that would be a foolish move, and we're not going to break the stream, as it were, with a last minute ad break. So we're going to charge on for the next hour, 8 minutes plus, as we get towards liftoff of this Starship rocket. Moving on down the line, $10 super chat from our Spaceflight Now side of the stream. Says, Will, can you ask Lab what a Buc-ee's is? Buc-ee's is a really popular, think of it like a mini Costco and a gas station all rolled into one. But Lab, do you want to hop on the mic, and for the folks that are not familiar with the cultural phenomenon that is spreading across the Southeast of what Buc-ee's is? Bit of a tangent from spaceflight activities, but briefly.
Yeah, Buc-ee's is a huge entity down here in Texas. Big rest stop for truckers, people that are commuting back and forth from different cities around Texas. It is a huge phenomenon. People love it. It's has some of the cleanest restrooms and very nice facilities. So yeah, Buc-ee's is high end down here in Texas.
Do you ever see a T-shirt or piece of paraphernalia with a very happy-go-lucky beaver? That is the Buc-ee's logo. So, thanks for the super chat donation, Gucci Pilot, one of our channel members. Glad to have you on board this morning. We'll come back to the super chats in just a moment, but we are now T-minus 1 hour, 7 minutes, 18 seconds and counting as we continue on down the pathway towards liftoff. Want to take a step back and talk about sort of the evolution. We've talked a lot about where the rocket has come since the first integrated flight test, sort of what we're anticipating for the milestones in this flight. Guys, let's talk a little bit about Starbase writ large, because we know it's going to be expanding over the next several months, several years, as launch operations really start to ramp up. Zack, we'll start with you. We know that there will be a second OLM that will come online. It'll be a big part of future demonstration missions like the propellant tank-to-tank transfer, and obviously as they gear up for the support of Artemis missions, Artemis 3 and 4. Let's talk a little bit about what Starbase is going to look like on the road to getting that additional capacity online.
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things that's happened over the last few days is just us being surprised by the fact that it does appear that they're in the process of getting started on that second launch pad. So is almost right on the heels of the Fish and Wildlife report. The very same day we started seeing the first sections of that next integration tower show up. So they've done a massive amount of work within the production site to speed up their actual manufacturing process. So, right now, I think on some of the cameras you guys may be able to see, depending on the lighting right now, the new mega bay that is nearing completion out there. The Star Factory is also deep into construction right now, and that alone is about twice as large as we were initially expecting. So, the amount of vehicles that they're currently able to produce is about to essentially double, and eventually I think we'll also see the Kennedy Space Center come online as far as their production site out there. So just overall their capacity to produce these rockets is increasing, and at some point they are going to need the additional capacity to actually launch them as well, and it seems like they're getting ahead on that game and are already starting to work on laying the groundwork for that next tower. So I think that's going to be one of the most exciting things that we'll see after this launch is the mad dash to get that second tower constructed. And I think the interesting thing, which was mentioned in the Fish and Wildlife report, is that they're not expecting any interruptions to their launch cadence, which I don't know if you can really consider it a cadence, considering that they're only really cleared for about 5 launches a year. So I think that would be a little bit more of a concern down in Florida, but out here it's really probably not going to be a huge interruption. So, you know, it's going to be pretty amazing watching them build another tower down here. Any of you who have traveled down here and actually got to stand next to the launch tower at all, you know, I think we're all pretty equally excited about what it's going to look like here in the near future once they get that other tower constructed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
before
yeah.
Marcus,
It's
you
been
jump in
interesting seeing
here.
that.
Oh, sorry to cut you off, Marcus. Just want to make a couple of quick notes that we're starting to see first light here at Starbase as the first little rays of sunlight are starting to crest over the horizon. Also have NASA's observing plane, which is inbound. Of course, this mission will be important on the pathway towards the human landing system version of Starship, and NASA has been very much involved with the development of Starship as it gets closer and closer to needing to be used for HLS missions on Artemis 3 and 4. And obviously, we've got the uncrewed landing demonstration before that. But Marcus, before we go too far down the Artemis rabbit hole, your thoughts on Starbase?
Oh yeah, look, the expansion plans have always sort of been there, at least over the last few years, and I've always wondered whether it will actually expand or whether it was just, you know, them obtaining the approvals to expand if they wanted to. But yeah, it's a very positive sign to see these tower sections coming in, and even since I talked about it in my last video last night, you know, there's been more sections show up, so that's really cool to see. I suppose there's a little bit of debate about whether they're building the 8th section here and then shipping the rest down to join it from the Cape, or whether they're building it here because they've got the staff here to do it and shipping that one over to the Cape. But I don't believe the second is probably the case. I think it's more likely that they're going to bring the new tower, all these tower pieces down. So what's interesting is they seem to be doing this well before any sort of work on the ground and foundations for us. I'm like, well, it seems odd that we wouldn't have seen a lot of expansion work already starting, but maybe they're simply waiting for this flight to go well before they sort of start ripping into that. Maybe we'll see huge construction just immediately jump in and start happening after this flight. Who knows? It's interesting to see.
Absolutely. And as we continue on this conversation, we're now coming up on the 1 hour mark, getting a great panning view of Starship launch vehicle. You can see some of the vapor right against the sides of the Superheavy booster there. You see one of the fins there in the center of your screen. Want to bring in an additional voice, very familiar to our Spaceflight Now audience. Returning for a cameo on the mic, we have Stephen Clark, who is now an ace space reporter over at Ars Technica. Fortunate enough to be on the ground with us here again for his second time seeing Starship launch. Stephen, welcome to the broadcast. Good to have you back on the channel.
Good to be here. Good morning, Will.
Good morning. Now you got a little bit of sleep before we really got this thing started. We were talking last night about the pathway that Starship will have after this flight test. Obviously, NASA, as we mentioned, watching this mission very closely. They've been tracking a lot of the upgrades that SpaceX has been making, both to the Starship vehicle that's going to fly, the next one's coming after it. You actually had the opportunity to talk with Lisa Watson-Morgan, who heads up the Human Landing System program, earlier this week. What was she kind of looking for and watching to learn from this flight test that we're having today?
Well, I think, in a perfect world, she wants to see them make it to space and make it to, I guess, near orbital velocity as if everything goes perfectly. That's what they'll do with Starship this morning is get up near orbital velocity, fly about 3/4 of the way around the world and splash down in Hawaii. So that would be a perfect outcome. It goes without saying, really. But in terms of what one thing that she pointed out, one thing that NASA is really eager to see is an improvement in the reliability of the Raptor engine. I think they had 5 or 6 engines that either failed to ignite or shut down in flight on the first flight test back in April. I think seeing no, or at least fewer Raptor engines fail on this flight on the booster will be a forward step. And I think getting to staging and getting through the hot staging, I think if they make it through that, I think that's a win, in my opinion. And I think that's what NASA feels too. But there's a lot of testing that needs to come on Starship, and none of that can happen until it has a successful orbital flight test. And those tests include some propellant transfer demonstrations that could occur toward the end of next year if this flight test is successful. But if Starship doesn't make it to space, doesn't make it to that near orbital velocity target, they'll have to do it again. And they have a lot of hardware here at Starship waiting in the wings to fly. But I think it's unlikely we'd see another orbital flight test this year. So that would delay things by some number of months.
Yeah, and all you have to do is just drive in really past the production site here at Starbase, and you can see all the flight hardware that's in buildings, out of buildings, as you mentioned, very ready and eager to get off the ground. We are now T-minus 57 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. Taking a look up the vehicle just beneath the quick disconnect, you see a frost ring forming on ship 25 as fueling continues to get underway. Zach, we were talking a little bit about some of the upgrades that were made to the Super Heavy booster to prevent some of the fires that were seen on the first integrated flight test. You've had the opportunity to look through the documents and the 63 action items that SpaceX has been overseeing as part of its mishap investigation. Kind of key into some of the ones that are most specifically impacting the intent to prevent both future fires as well as failures of the Raptor engines.
Yeah, I would say that one of the biggest things that they may not necessarily be able to prevent right now is actual engine explosions. That they've come a long way with testing on the Raptor engines, especially at McGregor. Do just constant engine tests going every single day. But I guess it seems to be a slightly different. Once you put them on the vehicle, you're transferring a massive amount of propellant to those engines all at one time. So I think they're still have a little bit of work to do with making sure that the engines are performing optimally during flight. However, in the event that they seem to suffer some explosive shutdown, you want to make sure that they're not taking out their neighbor, which is something that happened on the last flight. I think we saw, I actually still remember the engine numbers. Engine 19 during the last flight exploded, and that actually took out the shielding for engines 20, engine 18, and engine 17, which is pretty massive explosion to take out the shielding on the 3 adjacent engines. And I think as a result, engine 18 actually ended up shutting down shortly after that. So making sure that they have additional shielding. I think they've essentially doubled the amount of shielding that they have in between the engines. It's essentially like a containment box that surrounds the engine. So they've doubled the amount of shielding. So ideally, we shouldn't have to worry about shrapnel penetrating through those walls or overpressures from the engine explosions blowing out those walls. And so, I guess the goal behind that is, if you can't prevent necessarily engine explosions, you want to make sure you're actually able to at least contain them. So it's, a localized event and it doesn't kind of cause a cascading failure essentially. But beyond that, some of those explosions that occurred during the last flight were actual gas explosions. So, you have leaks that develop from the actual engines, and because they're in that contained space, you got to worry about a buildup of gas. And it's one thing if you have methane gas building up in there, but it's a completely different situation if you have oxygen building up in there as well. So one of the big items that they mentioned in 2 separate occasions on that report was to increase their fire suppression capacity by 15x. And that is something that we've seen tested on pretty much every static fire, every spin prime, and also during the wet dress rehearsal for booster 9 is that fire suppression system. So it's a very large two large CO2 tanks that they added onto the side of the booster, and they obviously fill those before flight. And we, from our understanding, they should be purging the engine compartments for the entire boost phase of flight, which is, I think, guessing here, but roughly about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So they ideally should be neutralizing any explosive mixtures that are in there, and preventing explosions like we saw happen on the last flight. So I think in that regard, things should go a lot better this time. Like, even if the actual performance of the Raptors themselves was the same, we shouldn't see collateral damage occur, which overall I think will make this flight go a lot better than last time. And I do want to just add that we have some fog rolling in right now. We're hoping for clear skies, so maybe we'll still get that, but right now we do have a little bank of fog rolling in. It's not as bad as it could be, but it's definitely there. So maybe some of you guys are seeing that depending on which view you're looking at on the live stream cameras, but from our view, it's starting to get slightly sad in that regard.
It's a pretty epic sight to see, though. You've got that lit up view now. It's always amazing, because it's happening so quickly this morning. We're only less than 50 minutes. We're really only, 25 minutes or something away from the SpaceX team actually streaming their own views of this, which, they've got they've got the great ability to have cameras wherever they want. So we should be seeing different perspectives pretty soon. But this is still a magic shot for me.
Yeah, it's great to see little Hopper in the foreground against its much more evolved cousin standing ready to launch fairly soon. And both question, I guess, to Zach and Stephen. You were both here, of course, for the first integrated flight test. I guess briefly bring us back for your experiences of that first launch, seeing it fly as a fully integrated Starship rocket, and just the feeling of getting to now, and how you're feeling about how everything has evolved to this point. And Stephen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I was here back in April for the first orbital flight test of Starship, and there were a lot of long faces and sad eyes around Starbase after that, particularly after they saw some of the damage at the pad. A lot of people had some worst case scenarios in their mind that there wouldn't be another launch this year. But pretty quickly, SpaceX got moving, as they always do, with repairing the pad, and they had a plan in place to install that water deluge system under the launch mount, and that was active and being tested in the middle of the summer. So SpaceX was ready to fly toward the end of summer, early fall, and one of the big holdups that we've talked about is waiting for that FAA license, and SpaceX has said that the FAA licensing process is actually in the critical path for having the Starship as a lander for the Artemis program. So that was pretty remarkable to hear from SpaceX a few weeks back. But here in April for this first launch, I was at this location for that launch, and there was actually a rogue cloud that was directly over the launch pad. So we lost sight of Starship within 20 seconds or so after it lifted off. But one thing that stuck with me is the sound of the launch, and I cannot wait to experience that again. The sound, I've seen something like 250, maybe a little more than 250 launches in my career, and seeing this launch was next level, to be honest with you, Will. And it was really spectacular, and had a really low pitch, low frequency rumble, and I can't wait to hear it again.
How did it compare to SLS for you?
The sound is different for sure. I was about the same distance from the Artemis 1 launch in Florida, and that launch, the SLS has those two big solid rocket boosters, which has more of a a slightly higher pitch, kind of a crackle sound, still very, very loud. But growing up as a kid, watching documentaries and old videos of the Saturn V, this thing sounds like the Saturn V, in my opinion. I never saw one, but I've seen lots of videos, and it reminded me of that sound.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that. I'm excited to experience it again. I would say, watching it from this location is pretty intense. We are, I think, about 3.7 miles away from the launch site, which almost feels illegal, I would say. It's pretty intense right now. I think without even, I don't need to really zoom my camera too much. I can see the full stack very, very well from this spot. And I would say last time around, it was, in my opinion, kind of terrifying. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but from this angle, we were able to see the lean of the booster. Like, I remember very, very clearly watching through the lens of my camera, and it leaned over pretty much immediately after it left the pad, and it wasn't climbing very fast. I think a lot of us have been expecting it to essentially jump off the pad, similar to the space shuttle. The space shuttle had a pretty quick ascent off of the pad. And so we were kind of expecting the same thing for Starship, but I guess with those 3 engines out, and they may have been a little bit lower throttle than what they initially planned to be, it seemed to climb very slowly, and that 20 seconds before it disappeared into the clouds kind of felt like an hour, honestly. I'm excited this time around. It seems like we have clear skies at least above the pad, and we'll be able to see it throughout its entire boost phase. And I think we'll get some pretty awesome views this time around. But I got fingers crossed for myself that it's not as dramatic as it was last time. I think even from this far away, I was able to see concrete in the air, flying, chunks of concrete flying through the air, and that's one thing that I don't think we'll have to worry about this time around. So I think things are looking good.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of their preparations that were made from last time to this time should be robust enough to prevent a cratering underneath the orbital launch mount. We'll keep our eyes open for that, and hopefully we don't see a repeat of last time where that's concerned. Now T-minus 46 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. Want to pop back into the live stream, thank a few more folks for super chat donations. As a reminder, it's a great way to join in the conversation. If you have any questions for any of the folks that are joining in the commentary, we'd love to answer your topics or questions. So please be sure to put those in the YouTube super chat feature, either on the Spaceflight Now or the LabPadre side. Love to bring you to the conversation. Superman P. Witherspoon with a $10 New Zealand donation. Thank you so much, Superman. Says, love the ad-free streams, and we're more than happy to bring those to you. Appreciate you helping to make that happen. Kitter's Refuge with a 70 ZAR donation. No comment, just support. Really appreciate that, Kitter's Refuge. Thank you so much. Tector in space. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that first word there, Tector, with a 10-pound super chat. The pound sterling comment. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the support. Nelson Reyes, one of our regulars on the Spaceflight Now streams, the $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Nelson. Says, once again, thanks for the great coverage, and want to take a quick beat to thank all of the folks that are helping to make this happen, both on the LabPadre as well as the Spaceflight Now side. There's a great team working very hard behind the scenes to make this all come to fruition. So really appreciate the work of all the great folks that are working to make this happen. So thanks for the recognition on that, Nelson. Erna with a 20,000 IDR super chat donation. Thank you so much, Erna. My conversion off the top of my head is not quite fast enough to make that switch over to US dollars, but really appreciate the generous support. Thank you so much. Alan McKeithen with a $5 super chat says, thanks for the commentary to you all. Let's go. And yes, it is quite the treat to be joined by Marcus, Zack, and Steven this morning, as well as Lab from time to time. So really appreciate these guys taking the time to be a part of the coverage this morning. always great to have their friendship and insight, especially on launch as dynamic as this one.
Pleasure.
We'll go ahead and come back to the conversation as we are still getting some great views of the Starship rocket as fueling continues underway. Now T-minus 44 minutes and counting. Before we jump back into the conversation in full, and I do want to talk more about this element on the other side, want to talk about sort of the flight path and the trajectory of this particular mission, because we are certainly hoping to see it go beyond stage separation, the point at which we didn't see for the first integrated flight test. So the folks over on the LabPadre side helped create this great launch profile animation. As you see the Starship liftoff, or this is from SpaceX. As you see the booster that will separate, it will do a boost back maneuver. Of course, we're all watching for that all important hot staging operation. It'll be a first for Starship. For those watching from down in the Miami area, you might be able to see Starship thread the needle as it coasts between the southern tip of Florida and Cuba, flying overhead. If all goes well, for a nominal flight, it will splash down off the coast of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean, a little bit north of there. So bringing the conversation back out to the three of you, we'll go back in sort of opposite direction. Marcus, we'll start with you. We all have hopes and expectations for, getting through a fully nominal mission and seeing ships splash down in the Pacific off the coast of Hawaii. What do you feel like will be the most challenging portion of this flight profile? Is it sort of what we're thinking that it is, getting through hot staging, or is there another element that you're also watching for?
Hot staging for me certainly a critical part, and that there's apprehension about that by many people because it is so new. But the one thing I think, if they can get past that, I think that there's a very good chance that they'll get all the way to orbit, because once you've got the engines fired up, as long as they're burning normally and happily away, usually there's not too much else that's going to interrupt things until you get to orbit. The one thing I'm really interested to see is the acceleration, and we'll be able to analyze that based on the readouts from the speed that SpaceX will show. So we'll be able to sort of figure out a rough thrust to weight ratio and all that sort of thing. I'm not sure whether they're going to really punch this thing. They're going to fire it up to 90% engines on all those 33, assuming that they can fire all 33. We haven't seen them actually have all 33 really go collectively successfully at this stage. I'm pretty sure we haven't. So there's a big question there. Are we just going to see 31 engines, 32 engines? Will we see all 33 going? Because it could also be, remember, that in a static fire, they've probably got much stricter conditions as to when an engine will simply stop firing. There can be 1,000 things wrong with engine pressure systems and flow and all this kind of stuff. And maybe in a static fire, they make those cutoffs very, very strict and particular. Whereas in flight, when they're more critical, maybe a lot of those checks and balances that will auto shut down engines is largely negated by the criticality of the thing. So that's going to be a big thing for me. How many engines we see actually leaving the pad? Hopefully all of them, and then the acceleration that we see, because it as Zack said before, it's a pretty scary sight seeing a rocket of that size just kind of crawling off the pad ever so slowly, and you think, my gosh, I hope this thing doesn't veer away. So we don't want to think negative about any of these things. They've done so much in terms of upgrading since the last flight, and I really think that we will at least see a successful flight up to stage separation and hopefully all the way to orbit. Of course, after that, the big thing is the heat shield, which is the big point of contention. And I don't think anybody really believes we're going to see all those tiles hold all the way to orbit. So that's going to be very interesting to see. What are your thoughts, Zack?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as heat shield goes, that's one of the lower items on my personal list. I think anything that happens with the ship is bonus. You know what I mean? You know, the hot staging I think is going to take center stage this time if they make it to stage separation. So, you know, I'm really excited. Hopefully, we'll have a good view of that when that happens. But I would say that may be the scariest part of the flight. Maybe, you know, there's about 3 different ways that can fail. They have the possibility of failing in max Q with that hot stage ring. There's also the possibility of the ship destroying the hot stage ring and the booster in the process. And there's also a possibility of overpressure within the aft section of the ship as a result of potentially, you know, not enough mass flow out of the hot stage ring and, you know, causing some sort of overpressure within the skirt of the ship. So lots of things that could go wrong, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting watching that in action, because this is one of those items where it's not necessarily a reaction of anything that happened during the first flight. It's just something that kind of came along that SpaceX was like, all right, well, this is what we want to do. You know, they didn't get a chance to do stage separation last time, but you know, I guess through their own simulations and you know, overall principles of physics, they decided that this is something that they wanted to do. So you know, the amount of testing I think that went into this was about as much as they could do. They did some structural verification testing on the hot stage ring, which should cover the whole max Q concern, I would say. They should be pretty confident that they won't have to worry about it collapsing during max Q. You know, I would say in that regard, one of the only other things that could happen if they end up doing somersaults through the air like they did last time, they may not be, I don't think they tested for that kind of loading, but as far as actual max Q testing, I think they're pretty set as far as that goes. But you know, you really can't simulate what's going to happen once the engines ignite on top of that ring. I think it would have been interesting to see an actual static fire test with the ship on top of that ring, but that's not really realistic when it comes to in-flight conditions. You know, you're going to be at a much higher altitude. You're you know, you can't really simulate that on the ground. So this is one of those kind of tests that really just has to be done in flight. So I think that's going to be one of the more exciting things is, you know, seeing something like this that there's really a lot of question marks on how it's actually going to end up working. So me personally, that's
yeah. I
one
mean,
of the
I'm
things
still
I'm
not
most
sure. You
excited
know,
for.
like, are we going to see all 6 engines fire up? Are we going to see the outer vacuums fire up just to try to get it away? And then the sea levels fire up straight after. I don't know if we've really seen any evidence to suggest that we know what that answer is. To me, it always seemed logical that they would fire up the 3 vacuums, but I don't know if that would be enough thrust to then get it away from the booster alone. Because the booster, remember, is quite empty. The thrust to weight, even with 3 engines running at minimal thrust, is probably still reasonably significant. And you've got a big, heavy ship on top, which, granted, doesn't have a payload. So hopefully, maybe 3 engines would be more than enough. But yeah, it's very interesting to me how that's going to work.
Absolutely. And just to jump in here as a time marker, now T-minus 35 minutes, coming up on 35 seconds as well. We should have the SpaceX feed starting in about 30 seconds or so. I imagine they will have their own commentary, so we more than likely won't have dedicated mission audio feeds even when SpaceX does come up, but we will keep tabs on that. And as some of the launch control call outs coming through the loops, we will of course bring those into you, hopefully via audio. And if we need to take a pause, we will pause to listen, and we will try to not talk over SpaceX's mission updates there. Want to make sure that we're getting the most accurate and up-to-date information, so we'll be cognizant of that as that gets underway. Stephen, do want to go back to a point that Marcus was making a moment ago about sort of the preparation for this first flight, the fact that in the static fires of the Super Heavy booster, we still haven't seen all 33 engines fire at once ever. Is that concerning at all in your mind, or do you feel like given the amount of information and data that SpaceX gathered from those static fire tests, that it's sufficient. I mean, apparently it's sufficient enough for them to launch today, but how are you sort of thinking about that element of this?
Well, in terms of today, I would not be surprised at all if we see one or two engines not firing when it lifts off the pad. I think in the long run, they've gotten close to having 33 engines. I think there were 2 that misfired on the most recent static fire of Super Heavy back in late August. I think that was the most they've had. So it's 31 engines. That was the most they've had fire at once. But if I recall, maybe Marcus or Zack can remember, I think that was like at half thrust, half throttle. And so it'll be really interesting to see how many engines are firing when it lifts off, and do they lose any during ascent. Zack was talking a little earlier about some of the shielding they've put in the engine bay to prevent kind of this concern about cascading failures, like if one engine has a problem or catches fire, that it doesn't spread to the neighboring or adjacent engines in those rings at the bottom of the booster. So I think that's something to watch as well. If they lose an engine, do they lose only one, or does it start affecting engines that are nearby? Because we saw on the first test flight back in April, the engines that they lost, some of them were right next to one another. So that was clearly a sign, probably that one engine may have been fine. It just succumbed to something that happened next to the engine next to it. One other thing that I would point out, we're talking about things to watch for. I wholeheartedly agree with what Zack and Marcus were saying about the engine reliability, the hot staging, the heat shield. Another thing, Marcus kind of hinted at this, was lighting the Raptor engines on Starship. SpaceX hasn't ignited a Raptor engine in a near vacuum of space before. And we've seen a couple of new rockets this year have problems at upper stage ignition. Japan's H3 rocket, as well as their Relativity Terran 1, both flew fine through the boost phase, and the engine didn't light on the upper stage. So I'm really curious to see how that ignition goes on the Raptor engines on Starship. Are there 3 firing? Are there 6 firing right off the bat? And how that goes, because they've never ignited a Raptor engine in a near vacuum, as this would be, a couple 100,000 feet above the Earth, very low air pressure as well at that altitude. So we'll see how that works if they make it that far. Hopefully they do.
And before Zack and Marcus, you jump back in, just want to make a quick programming note. You see our countdown clock at the top of the screen, T-minus 31 minutes, 25 seconds. A little bit of a discrepancy between that and the countdown you see on the SpaceX timeline. That's because SpaceX's feed is coming through X, which is on a little bit of a delay. So you'll see our countdown clock proceed, and we'll make the calls in real time, since our cameras are all in sync with, of course, real-time sequences out here at Starbase. And you'll see events on a slight delay on the SpaceX feed as we dip in and out of those views. So just want to put that out to our viewers at home as we get ready for liftoff, taking a view in there to SpaceX Mission Control as their flight teams are going through their countdown procedures, getting ready for liftoff. And this appears to be a look, panned away, but that was a little peek into the headquarters of SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. And this is over on South Padre Island, as some folks are waking up, heading down to the water's edge, hoping to see a launch coming up in just over 30 minutes. So as we were getting into the last half hour, Marcus, how are you feeling at this point as we're on the cusp of Starship flying once again?
Yeah, look, I've got the butterflies going already because there's a lot riding on this. We want to obviously see it leave the pad successfully and not cause damage like we saw last time, which I certainly don't think it will. But there's always apprehension in these ones. Super excited when it comes down to it, and yeah, it's coming down very quickly now. Actually, love that long shot that we've got there right now. Just listening in as well to the live stream at the same time to see if they're saying anything sort of interesting there. It's mainly stuff we know. They're talking about that trajectory like we discussed here, not far back.
Yeah, I think we have that trajectory that we can pop over onto the main screen, Steven, if you don't mind doing that. This will be the nominal flight path of Ship 25 if it does make it past staging and it's able to continue on and flight. It will splash down off the coast of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean about an hour and a half after liftoff this morning. So all things considered, not a terribly long flight profile, especially considering some of the other missions that SpaceX has undertaken in the not too distant past. But as we've been discussing throughout the course this morning, a number of things that could go wrong, some that could go right, but you know, they take an iterative approach to launch with SpaceX. So as much as they can get through, they will, and they'll learn and they'll turn around for a future flight as, you know, they get ready to launch the third flight test of Starship. And I guess, Zach, do we have any insight at this point as to when SpaceX may or may not start to have payloads on board Starship rocket, or do you imagine they'll continue flying for a while yet still without payloads on board as they just figure out all the mechanics of this rocket?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that having payload is one of their top goals right now. You know, from my point of view, like as long as you know that it's going to reach orbit, you might as well have a payload on there. So they did have some issues with both Ship 24 and Ship 25 with the actual payload section. You know, we never actually saw any issues with it, but I think, you know, being inside of the vehicle, they were able to determine that there were some problems with it. If I had to guess, they probably had some jamming of the door mechanisms or with the actual Starlink PEZ dispensers, and that kind of led to them welding the payload doors shut on both Ship 24 and Ship 25, which was interesting. I think that kind of goes into how much the importance of testing. So, you know, they didn't actually test the payload section until like right now. Actually, I think they have their payload section test article over at the Massey's.
Yeah, we've got John on
for
too.
launch in just over 26 minutes from now. Now, we delayed a day getting here. Yesterday on Friday, we had to replace a discrepant grid fin actuator on the first stage. We also replaced 2 other actuators as a precaution. The stages were remated, checked out, and everything was go for where we are right now this morning. Now, as I mentioned, we are in propellant loading. Both vehicles, the first and second stages, use the same 2 propellants. Our fuel is liquid methane at a temperature of just over 100 Kelvin, or about 272 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. This is a different fuel from Falcon 9, where we use the RP-1 kerosene. But our oxidizer is liquid oxygen, the same as Falcon 9. Because there is no oxygen in space to support combustion, we have to bring our own. We did the weather poll and the go-no-go poll at T-minus 2 hours. We got the goes, and we started loading both propellants on the booster at T-minus 1 hour and 36 minutes. And at T-minus 1 hour and 17 minutes, we began propellant loading of the ship second stage. Propellant loading of the Starship second stage main tanks will complete at approximately T-minus 22 minutes, just a few minutes from now. And at about the same time, we will switch over to loading the header tanks in the nose of the ship. Meanwhile, it'll be T-minus 3 minutes when Superheavy prop load completes on the first stage. And at that point, all propellant will be on the rocket, fully loaded with over 10 million pounds of propellant. As we near T0, it's worth noting that the timing of the countdown will be slightly different today. For Flight 1, we lit the engines and lifted off about 6 seconds later. For Flight 2, we aim to reduce that time by almost 2 seconds, shortening the period between engine start and liftoff. This will help reduce stress on the ground and the propulsion systems and improve the efficiency of the rocket. Now, right now, we're just inside T-minus 25 minutes to liftoff. The weather and winds are looking good. We haven't had any concerns there. The only issue we're working is getting the small boats out of the near range area in the offshore from Boca Chica Starbase. We do have the possibility of holding at T-minus 40 seconds as we're trying to get the last of the boats out of the safety area. Now, if for some reason we do not make our test flight today, we have a backup launch windows. This could be either 24 or 48 hours after today. It depends on how far we get into the countdown. But for now, everything's looking good as we've passed, coming up on the 24-minute mark. I'll hand it back to you, Kate and Shiva.
Alrighty, so a lot of good updates from John there at SpaceX. We're now at T-minus 23 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. The next big milestone will be at T-minus 19 minutes, 40 seconds when the Raptor engine chill begins. One of the things that jumped out at me that we sort of suspected, but it's nice to hear it from SpaceX, is that should they not be able to launch for whatever reason today, they do have backup opportunities potentially tomorrow as well as Monday. Although for those of us who have traveled in from out of state, I'm sure we're all hoping the launch goes off today and we can make it back on time for Thanksgiving with all of our families. So fingers crossed on a personal level that everything goes ship shape for ship 25 and booster 9. Starting with Marcus, we'll go around the horn again. Anything in particular that stood out from John's comments just now, or was it pretty much all what we were kind of expecting to hear from SpaceX at this point?
Yeah, pretty much what we were expecting. It's good to hear that they are reducing the time on the pad while those engines are firing. That reduction, I think he said, of 2 seconds there, although I was struggling to hear. Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing. It's more performance, it's less pressure on the pad, and yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, ideally they would be firing and leaving the pad within a second or two after this thing gets super routine and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was the only standout part for me. Obviously, the boats being in the way is a frustrating problem, and if they end up being the cause of a delay, these are the things where, you know, SpaceX, I'm sure, would like some of the regulations just relaxed a little bit. Depends where they are, of course. If they're just on the outside or just slightly on the inside of one of the exclusion zones, even though they've all been warned, it's like, you know, arguably they should be able to relax some of those conditions for an event of this magnitude. But you know, look, everybody's doing the best they can. Let's hope they get those boats out of the way.
Zach, anything of note jump out at you, or pretty much on pace with Marcus there as far as what we heard from SpaceX?
Yeah, probably about the same. You know, I guess just to finish the thought from before, you know, I think that we probably should expect to see payloads potentially, well, I want to say on the next flight, but it won't be like a full payload. It would be more like a possibly a dummy payload of at least a single Starlink V2. And, you know, the goal would be to make sure that the actual the payload dispensing mechanism is working as planned. And, you know, ideally, if you're launching and you know you're going to make it to orbit, it doesn't really matter what the ship's going to do on the way in. It doesn't matter what the booster is going to do on the way back. As long as you know you're making it to orbit, you may as well be dispensing payloads. And I think that they kind of have that same thought. You know, these are expensive vehicles. You're going to lose 33, possibly up to 39 Raptor engines in the process. So you may as well get some Starlink V2s up in orbit if you can. You know, that's one of the cool things about Starship in comparison to Falcon 9 back in those development days, is that, you know, they can send up their own payloads at this point, so they're not really worried about risk to customers or anything, because they are the customers, so they can pretty much do whatever they want in that regard. And I think that they're going to want to, as I said, start launching Starlinks from Starship as quickly as possible, because you're kind of limited. I think with the V2s, they're limited to what, like 23? Is it 23 that they've been launching lately on the Falcon 9s? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
slightly less from Vandenberg.
Yeah, we have no idea how many Starship is actually going to hold, but it's going to be drastically higher than that. So, you know, I think that, you know, if you can put 4 times the amount of payload with Starship, that you're going to want to do that as quickly as you can.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, absolutely.
23 Starlink V2 minis from the Cape and currently 22 from Vandenberg that we're seeing right now. Sorry, Marcus, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just 19 minutes, 8 seconds out. We are now underway with the Raptor engine chill sequence. Just want to make a note of that as we are very quickly and on time stepping through this countdown procedure. So all signs going well. Stephen did happen to catch over on the horizon NASA's WB-57 observation plane. Of course, we've talked about the fact that Starship is going to play a very important role in the Artemis program as the human landing system for both Artemis 3 and 4 missions, likely for others down the road, but those are the 2 that they're currently on contract for. Important, of course, because those will be the first times under the Artemis program that will be bringing humans down to the surface of the moon for the first time since Apollo 17 in 1972. So really important that NASA keeps eyes on this mission and obviously gets good data from it as it learns. Just seeing a quick update from SpaceX. They just posted the video of what the hot staging looks like in an animation. So getting our first official rendering of what this will look like from SpaceX's perspective. Seen a lot of fan renderings floating around online, but now we've got the official one here as we're looking forward to seeing the real thing in in the timeline after liftoff. It'll be about 20 or so minutes from now. And Marcus, I cut you off mid-thought. Go ahead.
No, I don't think he did actually. I wasn't really adding anything to that comment. I'm just sort of listening along to the SpaceX stream there, and they're really putting a lot of emphasis on the hot staging event being the milestone. That's the success milestone as far as they're concerned, and everything else sounds like gravy. I'm just sort of watching that hot staging ring there now. Did it show us how many engines were going to fire? I might have missed that. I don't know if it did.
If any of our folks in the back channels have the answer to that, if you can let us know they have an answer to that, that'd be great. In the meantime, Stephen had a question for Zack. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, Zach, we heard from John and Swicker that they have backup opportunities. Hopefully they don't have to use them tomorrow or Monday, 24 or 48 hours. I'm curious, Zach, since you closely follow what's going on with the launch facilities and ground infrastructure down here at Starbase, is that feasible? Do they have to bring in tankers to replenish the tank farm? And can they do that in 24 hours?
So I think last time around, they did refill the tank farm after the abort on the 17th. And, I think it appeared that it was like kind of a required thing that they have that much loss in propellant, probably specifically with liquid oxygen, that they needed to, replenish the tank farm. But I think most of that was kind of due to the fact that they were also working with some issues on the booster QD and the hydraulic power unit on the booster. So as far as what we have been able to tell, it seems like they have enough propellant in those tank farms for 2.5 launches. So theoretically, they should not need to replenish. And I guess another thing we found out recently, thanks to that Fish and Wildlife report, was related to how much water they're using. So they have about 360,000 gallons of water for that the active flame deflector system. And I guess they only use about 136,000 gallons during a launch attempt. So theoretically, if they turn on the engines at T-2 seconds or something like that, and they end up having an abort, that water system will already be active. So theoretically you could have to worry about having to refill the water tanks, but I guess we are now a little bit more certain that that won't be an issue, since they should have about 2.5 launches worth of water in those tanks. So during an actual abort, I think it's not impossible at this point that we could expect to see another opportunity tomorrow. So fingers crossed that we don't have to actually worry about that.
And on the official timeline that SpaceX published, the next event is not until the final 10 seconds when the flame deflector that we were just talking about will be activated. But Zach, you were saying as you were looking at some of the previous fueling attempts and static fires that there's the ground gas purge event that's going to come up before then. About how far out from T0 is that going to happen?
So it should be as soon as propellant loading ends, it'll actually look like they started loading fuel again. So what they do is once they finish loading fuel on the ship and booster, they'll actually empty all of the propellant lines that are easily drainable. So there's some that are on the actual GSE arm on the tower. All of that, they have a vent that they can open up and purge all of the liquid oxygen, and same thing on the launch mount. And so after that, they'll actually switch over both the liquid oxygen and liquid methane pumps over to pumping nitrogen, and essentially push that all the way through the system, all the way up to the top of the tower, the top of the launch mount. And you'll actually see them push all of that fluid, at least on the oxygen side, you'll see them push all of that out of the tower and the launch mount. And I think that'll probably, it's tough to say because the wet dress rehearsal didn't go all the way to T-0 or T0, but I don't know. I want to say it's probably within the last 2 minutes. So we'll probably be able to revise that a little bit after this launch of what to expect. It was the first time they tested it on the wet dress rehearsal.
Gotcha. Appreciate the insight.
It was
there.
confirmed, by the way, that all three of the inner gimbaled engines on Starship would gimbal away at stage set, so they'll all fire up, which is what I thought they might do. So, the other thought I had was that it might be 3 vacuums just to get the initial separation going, but it sounds like all 6.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to that, Marcus. T-minus 12 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. We are getting right down to it, coming up on the last 10 minutes here. Want to quickly look at the super chats that have come in and thank a few more folks for supporting our coverage this morning. James G from the LabPadre stream with a $20 Australian dollars super chat. Thank you so much, James. Really appreciate your support this morning. Marilyn Morgan with a very generous $50 super chat on the Padre stream. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Happy to have you aboard with us this morning. I hope you're enjoying the sights and very soon the many sounds of Starship going up in just a little over 11 and a half minutes. Moving on down the road here, Scat 1975 with a 10 pound sterling super chat. Thank you so much. 1975 says, big love to all the nerds, lab and RGV crew. Yes, it's been great to work here on the ground with the folks at LabPadre. Really appreciate the partnership, and also want to just thank again Marcus, Zach, and Steven for being generous with their time this morning as we get ready for launch. Stan J with a $10 super chat with just a rocket and a fire emoji as we're all getting fired up for the launch of Starship, just about 10 and a half minutes away from now. See if I can get a few more in here. Perpetual Nerd with a $5 super chat. Thank you so much from the LabPadre stream. Says, thanks for the live coverage. Wouldn't miss it. And glad you are here and not missing it. It should be quite an event should they be able to launch this morning. And of course, as John mentioned from SpaceX, they may hold at T-minus 40 seconds, and they do have a 20-minute window. So if the count does pause at that point, never fear, this is not a Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy launch. The commitment to the start of fueling does not mean that they have to stand down. Also want to give another quick thanks as I'm recognizing some of the folks supporting us, Sapphire Condominiums, as well as Isla Grande Beach Resort. Really appreciate that, as we've been getting some great views from north of our position on South Padre Island. Our Adam Bernstein and Chief are also up there getting some of those views for us. If we could bring up the Sapphire view, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind, just to give folks an idea of what that'll look like. Yeah, this is from north of our position here. We are pretty much due west of the orbital launch mount where we're sitting here at the Raptor Roost. Looking forward to launch. T-minus 9 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. Go through a few more super chats briefly, and then we'll get back into the conversation. Brian Steele with a $15 Australian dollar super chat. Thank you so much. Says, let's get this bad boy up. 2 thumbs up. Wholeheartedly agree. Christopher Sean with a €10 super chat. No comment, but appreciate the support, Christopher. Thank you.
Over 9 minutes from liftoff as the countdown clock clicks to 0. The teams, good news is, teams aren't working any significant issues on the launch vehicle right now. Propellant loading is continuing on both the Super Heavy and the ship stages. Most recently, we began loading LOX and methane fuel into the header tanks on the Starship. And on the graphic on the left side of the screen, you can see up in the nose of the second stage, what we call Starship, are those 2 header tanks for fuel and liquid oxygen. Now that loading started at T-minus 24 minutes and will continue until approximately T-minus 5.5 minutes. Now Starship's second stage main fuel and LOX tanks are loaded for flight. And the second stage propellant that we're loading on board is going through the quick disconnect that comes out on the arm that's located at the base of the stage from the tower. Now on the Super Heavy booster, propellant loading will continue until T-minus 3 minutes. We've also configured the pad for liftoff. A little earlier in the count, the hold downs, the booster hold downs were commanded to unlatch. That means once the rocket has sufficient thrust to overcome its weight, it'll lift off the pad. There's no need to command the hold downs to release the rocket. As we mentioned earlier also, the ignition sequence has been slightly modified from the last flight for a more efficient liftoff. As a reminder, we ignite the engines a few seconds before T0. We don't lift off exactly at T0. We lift off a few seconds later, a couple seconds. Finally, the SpaceX team continues to check in with the Coast Guard to ensure there are no boats in the safety perimeter before proceeding with launch out over the Gulf of Mexico. Now, currently, we're coming up T-minus 7 minutes, 10 seconds to the test flight of Starship. Propellant loading is continuing on both stages of Starship. We're waiting now for the completion of loading of the header tanks in the next few minutes. The first stage is also beginning pressurization for flight while we are continuing to load propellant into it. And again, booster propellant load will finish at approximately T-minus 3 minutes. At that stage, both first and second stages are fully loaded, and we'll have the 10 million pounds of liquid propellant on board the 2 stages of Starship. Now, in the next few minutes, the guidance system will perform its final alignment. We'll get the automated flight termination system that'll arm, and the final TVC checkout will be performed. We may get a view looking up at the engines as we gimbal the 13 middle engines to check them out just before liftoff at about T-minus 90 seconds. If we need to hold, it would come at T-minus 40 seconds. That's the point in the countdown where we can pause to wait for final checkouts or pressurization to complete. Or, as we're hearing right now, we're still working a few boats in the area that are headed south. And a lot of cheering here in Hawthorne. The boats are heading south, but we are still planning to hold at T-minus 40 seconds if necessary.
Just amazing views of today's launch. There's nothing
Well,
quite
sounds
right.
like that's the end of John Ensbacher's update from SpaceX. A lot of good information there. Stephen, as we've encountered, certainly covering launches from the Cape, pesky boats in the water are certainly something that we are not fond of seeing, and it's much more of an intrusive item because the fueling has started and the boats haven't cleared the area. They have no margin for error with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, but fortunately they can't hold at T-minus 40 seconds. So that's good news if needed, right?
Yeah, exactly right, Will. They have a 20-minute launch window to work with this morning, so they can hold at 40 seconds, I presume, for all 20 minutes if necessary. I'm not sure if there's any limitation on that, but how long they can hold at that point. But they do have that 20-minute launch window to work with, and if the boats are heading in the right direction, we may or may not see a launch at 7, but hopefully we'll see one sometime between 7 and 7:20.
Yeah, and Zach, we've been talking about some of the differences between Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and Starship. As John also mentioned, because of the way that Starship launches, unlike Falcon mission, they don't need to issue a hold down release. The Starship is capable of doing that all on its own. What else jumped out from you in the latest update from SpaceX?
Yeah, I mean, that has always been an interesting thing to me that we found out at the last launch, which was, you know, that releasing those hold down clamps early. I guess we always kind of thought it would be, you know, ignition, release the hold down clamps. But I guess, you know, having just the sheer weight of the vehicle sitting on those clamps is about enough, all you need. You know, it kind of makes sense. You know, you don't want any possible risk of failure of that, so release them as early as possible and essentially just let the vehicle lift off the pad without having anything holding it down. So you know, that's going to be really awesome to see once again. You know, I do think it's interesting having those boats out there in the exclusion zone, which doesn't really surprise me. I think some people are probably trying to get out there to the recovery zone, which I would maybe advise against, because you never know what this thing is going to do once it's in the air. But yeah, I mean, it seems like everything is good to go. I can tell right now they have finished loading propellant on both the ship and booster. They just finished purging the launch tower, it seems like. So I would say they're finished, at least on the ship for sure. I can't really tell on the booster because there's a lot of fog going here, but yeah, we're getting really close right now. It's you know, time to get excited.
Absolutely. And Marcus, did anything else that we haven't already touched on jump out at you? I know you've been able to listen a little more keenly and through both John's updates on fueling as well as some of the SpaceX general commentary.
No, look, not particularly. That hasn't already been covered. The you know, they're obviously going right now through various explanations of how big the ship is and why this is important and all this kind of stuff. They've got a great animation of you know, Mechazilla, like an animated Mechazilla coming over, walking past. So you know, these cool sort of insights that they're sharing for those that probably aren't as closely up to speed with what this all means, which is great for the general public. You know, this is why we want people to be interested.
Absolutely. And speaking of interested, we see, as you mentioned, the little hard to see through the venting there, but might be doing the gimbling on those center engines. A little hard to tell if there is in fact motion. Now T-minus 1 minute 27 seconds and counting. Again, they may hold at T-minus 40 seconds, but all things being equal, gentlemen, we are closing in on the last couple of minutes before Starship heads off.
Yeah, they're just moving the engines now.
There you go. 10 seconds around the horn to each of you. We'll start with Marcus, then go to Zach, then to Steven. Final thoughts as we enter in the last minute of the count, quickly.
Yeah, look, I've got everything crossed. This is incredibly important, and you know, we just need this to clear the tower. Zach, what do you think?
As we're coming up on T-minus 1 minute, when we get to T-minus 40 seconds, we'll just listen in. Last time, as you recall, we did hold at 40 seconds, but it took a few seconds for the clock to recover, so we're going to watch that. And as we press to T0, we're going to watch and listen the second test flight of Starship.
Yeah, I guess really quick. You know, I'm excited for this. I think this is a big day. If this goes well, we're air holding.
Anticipation.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. The brief hold. Our countdown clock is moving forward.
Still counting down.
All right, we're 10.
T-minus 30 seconds.
8, 7, 6,
Back to
5,
rapid recycle.
4, 3. Okay, the clock is not accurate. It may actually be in a hold. Okay.
Looks like they've gone back to 41.
All right, so the hold was called. It looked like it came on, came off, and is back on again.
Looks like it. Whew.
Got me excited there for a second.
I know, we were counting down
Back
10.
at
Like,
Hawthorne,
wait,
we're
hang
at
on.
T-minus 40 seconds in holding. We had a rapid recycle. We've not heard anything over the countdown net as the team works both first and second stages. We're going to monitor the nets here for a minute.
All right, so we are, as it appeared, in a holding pattern. Of course, just as a reminder for anyone who may have joined in the live streams here, either on the LabPadre side or the
Got a little bit of an
Spaceflight Now
update.
side.
We're continuing to hold at T-minus 40 seconds. This is the normal hold point for Starship, as we talked earlier. Sounds like we're working just late pressurization on, I believe, the second stage. Team is working it. All the other systems are on hold right now at 40 seconds. We can hold here for about 15 minutes or so before we would run out of window for this morning. So right now they're working on filling pressure vessels. And ideally we'll be able to solve this and come back and release the clock at T-minus 40 seconds. We're going to continue to listen and monitor for another few minutes.
Come on.
So hearing from John that, of course, the hold is something that they planned for, that they have time for, not infinite time.
And it's worth mentioning here that don't go away. We are holding.
So we will continue to keep eyes on, and of course, if John Isbacher pops back in with an update, we will listen to that and talk about any of the pertinent updated information. But at this point, we expect any updates from SpaceX to be obviously very pertinent to the launch attempt here, hopefully sooner rather than later.
We're counting down.
The SpaceX count before. Oh, we have ignition.
Yes.
And liftoff of the Starship rocket on its second integrated flight test.
My gosh.
This is quite the sight as Starship takes the skies for just the second time. Let's listen in.
Go, go, go. Yes. Look at all those engines. Every one of them's on. Yes.
Now a little over a minute in flight.
Come on.
Oh, wow.
Starship continues to climb. We're looking towards booster main engine cutoff at T+2 minutes 39 seconds. That'll set up the hot staging at T+2 minutes 41 seconds. The milestone SpaceX was not able to reach last time. Let's see if they can pull it off this time. As the sun comes up over the horizon.
This is amazing. Amazing.
Spectacular liftoff of the Starship integrated launch vehicle for just the second time. You can still see the brightly burning Raptor engines at the bottom of the Superheavy booster. Getting some great tracking views from our team here on the ground, toggling between us and SpaceX views.
This is just flawless.
All 33 Raptor engines are still ignited according to the SpaceX graphic here you see there on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Now about to cross 5,000 kilometers per hour.
Wow.
Oh. That
Come
looks
on.
like it was Biko. And we appear to have a successful stage separation. The hot
My
staging
gosh.
does appear to have been successful as the super heavy booster 9 now making its way down for a splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. Ship 25 continuing on its trajectory.
Looks like a few engines are out though.
Did they just lose the booster?
Oh,
We may have lost the booster there. Let's see. Still see a dot on the horizon there.
wow.
Now a few minutes into flight.
This is a great win though.
Yeah, that was insane.
Yeah, as we continue to watch this flight go on, just briefly, let's go around the horn, starting with Steven. If you could talk about what we've been able to see so far and what are your thoughts about this flight profile at this point in time?
Really impressive. I think that seeing all 33 engines firing throughout the boost burn of the Super Heavy, that was a huge thing to see, a big step forward. Hot staging appeared to work as designed. That was really impressive. It was very obvious to see here visually. And I think they may have lost the booster. It looked like it did explode during that boost back burn or shortly after the boost back burn. But the ship still going down range. I think I've lost a visual of it, but any update there?
Yeah, checking the SpaceX feed to see sort of where things stand. We're at T plus 5 minutes, 10 seconds. They do still have tracking views of ship from the ground traveling at a speed of about 3,800 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 90 kilometers. So ship still flying, and you can see here on your screen. It's
yeah, past
this.
11,000.
So assuming all continues nominally for ship, we very well may see a splashdown off the coast of Hawaii as was intended for the nominal flight profile of this part of the mission. So while we had a bit of a hiccup with the booster, I've still got quite a bit for SpaceX to be extremely proud of. Zach, how are you feeling about, getting to see the big item that we were watching for? We saw hot staging carry on successfully, and now ship is sailing.
Man, I would say that was insanely impressive. Like, you can't ask for a better improvement on the first flight than that. Obviously, we're gonna have to wait and see what the pad looks like, but I mean, man, that booster performed flawlessly. I guess I wasn't really watching the actual live stream on SpaceX's side, but I guess they have had all 33 engines the entire time. So, man, going from having 3 engines out on the last static fire to having all 33 that time and reaching stage separation, I mean, that thing jumped off the pad. Wow. I mean, you can't really ask for a better second launch than that. Obviously, it did seem like we lost the booster, but, who cares? As long as the ship gets to continue on, at least they're getting data on the ship this time. So, I guess on my side, the only sad part about losing the booster is, I think that means that's going to push out one extra launch for when we should expect to see like the first attempt of them trying to catch the booster with the integration tower. But that's okay. We're making progress, and this is I'm sure the SpaceX team is really excited right now.
Want to note where we are
Yeah.
in the count. It's T plus 7 minutes, 21 seconds. The next milestone that we're expecting here is Starship engine cutoff at T plus 8 minutes, 33 seconds. But by the graphic on the bottom of the SpaceX feed, it appears that all 6 engines on ship are continuing to burn nominally from our perspective. And as Stephen noted, ship has crossed the Kármán line. So SpaceX has now reached space with ship for the first time. Pretty big milestone, Marcus.
Yeah, look, we're past 22,000. We're nearly there. You can see just how little propellant there is left. You know, this is designed to only just get there. So again, we're very curious to see if it can just get to that designated spot.
Marcus, I'm a bit out of the loop. Is this are they winning with the first
Engine shutdown.
engine to orbit?
Engine shutdown there. Hopefully it was planned. It looks like it. Sorry, Zach, what was that?
So I'm a little out of the loop. You would know this better than me. Is Starship now the first Methalox rocket in orbit, or did China beat them? I'm not sure.
Yeah, China sort of had one, but I mean, this is actually arguably orbital. I've always argued this is still kind of orbital, but this is all looking great. They're just saying, yeah.
As you can tell by the excitement from the crowd here at Mission Control Center in Hawthorne. There's a great view of our Star Command Center. That's our control center at Starbase, Texas. The crowd here, Mission Control Center behind us in Hawthorne. Everyone is super exciting. What a successful day this has been so far.
Well, I mean, it was supposed to be a little early, but I don't know how early. I would have thought it would have been just a little faster.
Yeah, it looked like it
But maybe
came
not.
about
And I mean,
8
up to
minutes,
this point,
17 seconds into
major
flight. So that
successful
was
milestones
just
through
about
hot
15
staging, which
seconds
was the
early.
big objective today.
We'll see how much that may or may not impact the rest of the flight of ship.
So
Just awaiting
we are going
acquisition
to
of
head
signal.
into the coast phase, planned for the next about hour and 5 minutes. We'll be returning around the T plus 1 hour and 15-minute mark. And that's while we're waiting for Starship to continue on to its next step for reentry. We're not totally sure what video we're going to get, and that video comes normally by overflying ground stations, but we don't have a ton along our flight path. So fingers crossed that we will get some via Starlink on this mission since we're testing that out.
Of course, we certainly hope that we'll be able to see some of those onboard views of
And also give us
Starship.
a moment. We are hearing some chatter on the net, so we're going to try to parse that for you.
Stand by for those updates. Of course, we'll pause as SpaceX briefs on the status of ship as it continues to fly. Now approaching 11 minutes into flight. Certainly a lot of excitement here at the Raptor Roost, as we certainly saw what appeared to be a very successful liftoff through staging, sailing on a
Dude, that's
sailing on a
straight
ship here.
flawless.
The actual booster part of it was just amazing. The stage separation was amazing. All of it was amazing.
On this worker
Obviously,
back here in
excluding the
Hawthorne
booster.
at our web,
Hold up.
Wow.
we have lost
I
the
might need
data
that
from
video
the
from you.
second stage. We had heard a call out that we were internal guidance, which means we were getting near the end of the approximately 6-minute burn of Starship, but we haven't gotten any more data since then. So we think we may have lost the second stage. So we would not be into coast phase. We wouldn't be able to come back in an hour or so and possibly get ready for reentry. However, what we do know right now is we had an on-time launch at 7 o'clock. We got through the boats. First stage looked beautiful with 33 Raptor engines firing. We got the hot staging, you know, the thing that we really wanted to see and impressed. We saw the separation. We saw the flip maneuver. We saw the light up of the 6 Raptor engines on Starship, and it headed away. Everything really looked good. But what we do believe right now is that the automated flight termination system on second stage appears to have triggered very late in the burn as we were headed downrange out over the Gulf of Mexico. But the real topping on the cake today, that successful liftoff, Kate, Shiva, the hot staging is just beautiful. Exactly what we were looking for.
Yeah, ultimately, honestly, such an incredibly successful day. Even though we did have a RUD or a rapid unscheduled disassembly of both the
And bringing it back to our commentary here. So it sounds like ship did not make it beyond the Gulf of Mexico. So both first and second stages staying not too terribly far away from where they lifted off just a little bit after 7 o'clock this morning. Thoughts around the horn here, gentlemen, on the flight as we know it. Having seen where IFT-1 got to now with IFT-2 in the books, what are kind of your overall thoughts as far as where the Starship program is and where do we head next? Zach, we'll start with you, go to Marcus, and then to Stephen.
I'm really excited. I think this was a major milestone. I think one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to right now is just to see how fast they try to do this again. So, we know they're cleared for 5 launches a year, and the year is almost over. So if I was them, I would maybe try and get the next vehicle up there as quickly as possible. So I would not at all be surprised to see a launch in December. But as far as we know, they haven't actually announced any plans of that. They're just trying to get through this. But man, that was pretty amazing. Losing the vehicle, losing both vehicles, kind of sad, but making it through those major milestones that they did, getting way past what they did at the IFT-1. I think we're well on our way to seeing some really great things in the future from Starship.
Yeah, look, it's just mind-boggling to me. The thing that we want to see now is how well that plate has held up. As long as we don't see any damage or any people rushing in there to try to start repairing things, I think that this has been an amazing success because we had the full, we had the full launch there. All 33 Raptor engines, as far as I could see, it was lifting off with about the thruster weight that I would expect. So that's a really great sign. And the fact that it got through hot staging, we didn't see any engine die at all until after the booster had separated, and there was obviously a problem there. We saw them collectively dropping out quite rapidly, actually, before it blew up. So that was probably more something to do with various pressures and sloshing of fuels and propellants and all that sort of thing, I would guess. But the fact that the Starship made it all that way, we didn't see those engines flicker once. Something's obviously happened at the end there. I don't know whether it shut down or whether it sounds like it was probably it had triggered the FTS for some reason. But the fact that it got that far, I mean, I would have been thrilled to see it go past stage set, but getting almost, or very, very close there to orbital velocity, 24,000 is very, very close. Only a few more seconds and they would have had that. So not sure what happened there, but it's amazing. I'm absolutely ecstatic about it.
Stephen, getting to be up close with this launch as we were for IFT-1. This is my first time seeing Starship launch in person. It was quite something, and as you mentioned, it was even more impactful, I think, as far as just a sheer noise and rumble environmental impact compared to SLS over at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. What was your takeaway from both seeing it launch and just the point at which it got to in its flight?
It was great to see it, with clear skies. That was a big thing. The difference between this launch and the one in April is we saw it for more than 20 seconds. And I was looking through my viewfinder on my camera with a 600 millimeter lens, maybe 30, 40 seconds after launch, and I could see through the viewfinder that all 33 engines were firing. And I was like, that's a really good sign. If it's 40 seconds in, all 33 engines firing, means it got off the pad with all 33 firing. And it looks like all 33 were burning for the full duration on the booster until that hot staging event. And we were able to track Starship downrange for 5 or 6 minutes, I think, until it kind of flew into the sun glare. And this, SpaceX has to walk away from this feeling really good, because they achieved a lot today. It'll be interesting, like Zack was talking about a few minutes ago, where they go from here. Do they kind of rush one of the vehicles, not rush, but move one of the vehicles they have in flow out to the pad and just redo this flight profile again in a matter of weeks or a couple of months? Or do we see a vehicle for the third flight test that has some more evolution to it, that maybe can carry a payload into orbit and perhaps go all the way to orbital velocity, to a stable orbit, rather than doing this intentional trajectory just shy of orbital velocity with a splashdown in Hawaii? So I think SpaceX has, probably has some ideas of what they're doing next, but they haven't really shared that. But it'll be, they got to be, like I said, they have to be feeling really confident after this, because I think the Starship era is here at this point, you can safely say. And, they we're a matter of 15-20 seconds from reaching their planned velocity. And things like that, it looks like they had data all the way up until the flight termination system triggered. So they can probably have data once they analyze it of what caused the FTS to trigger, and whether that was an engine problem or a guidance problem or something. We'll see. But I think they have data throughout that profile to know exactly what went right and exactly what may have gone wrong toward the end of Starship's burn.
And certainly NASA is very eager to take a look at that data, since it got so much further, and that'll really help inform Lisa Watson-Morgan and her team with the HLS program in the capabilities and the capacity of Starship, as they need to see how it performs and how it evolves before you get to even close to introducing the human element.
Yeah, exactly right. And from NASA's perspective, they wanted to see a successful orbital flight test. Not sure if this meets every box of that for their requirement. They do have a data architecture review between NASA and SpaceX coming up after this flight test, and where they'll go over all the objectives and see if that meets the requirement for that milestone in the HLS contract. If it does, the next thing that NASA really cares about is the propellant transfer. Getting the Starship into orbit first for a tank-to-tank transfer within one Starship vehicle, and then later on a ship-to-ship propellant transfer, which is a whole different level of complexity of bringing two Starships together in orbit. And to do that, you probably need 2 launch pads active, either 2 here or here in Florida, here and Florida. We'll see how that shakes out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Zack, if you're still on the mic with us, one of the things that we were talking about as a watch item, and certainly something that we felt pretty good about coming into this, was going to be the performance of the infrastructure around Starship. Didn't really get a lot of good sort of pointing down views of the pad from here, especially after liftoff. But from the lack of a giant cloud of concrete and debris, it seems like the upgrades to the infrastructure, especially the launch pad, really stood up to Starship and its power.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just still taking all this in. I think hopefully we will get some views of the pad. I think the fact that we didn't see concrete flying through the air is a good sign. I think we're probably good to go. You know what I mean? Obviously they're probably gonna do some analysis on the actual result on the pad, but I think it ideally could be a quick turnaround, if everything went as well as it looks like it did. I remember last time, at this point we're still seeing smoke coming off of the launch mount and the surrounding areas, and it looks clean right now. I don't see any remaining smoke or anything like that. You know, this is a night and day difference from the first launch, that's for sure.
It's
Yeah,
definitely
Marcus.
much improved. I'm looking at various replays from so many cameras to try to nail this. I mean, it looks like there is some debris. Like there's not no debris, there is some debris, and we're just trying to figure out what it is. It looks like most of it is light stuff that is probably immaterial. There was quite a couple of little hefty chunks of something that did go flying at some point. But if anything, I would hope that that's probably outer concrete from outside the steel plate system. If anything, that's probably a worst case scenario in my very amateur opinion right now. So yeah, there was a little bit of stuff flying, but certainly absolutely night and day between the first launch. I think this was incredibly successful.
Yeah, and Marcus, now that we sort of have a gauge of, what SpaceX was able to accomplish, obviously very preliminary, just sort of seeing with our own eyes. We don't have, hard data to really mine at this point. But going to Stephen's point earlier, how do you imagine SpaceX is going to be looking at its next test flight of Starship? Do you think they might push to the point of trying to reach true orbital velocity and get to that stage, or do you think they may try to repeat the same flight profile of this mission and get to the point where we go through a fully successful launch profile that they were attempting for today?
Yeah, look, I think given that they really didn't make it to orbit, as far as we can tell, or to their designated target, because it wasn't quite orbital anyway, it was going to be just shy of it. But considering it didn't get there, they've really got no data on how well that engine cutoff would have been had it have been the proper planned one, and anything like that. They're certainly not going to have any re-entry data on how it was able to be controlled. So I don't see that they would have much more choice but to try to repeat the similar sort of flight. If anything, I think that the booster explosion, that's, if anything, is going to raise flags. It'd be, okay, why did that happen and how dangerous was it? There's probably going to need to be a report done on that event before they're happy to let it go again, because remember, this isn't just flying to stage SEP, it's coming back quite close to land, and they intended for this to come back eventually and land at the tower. So they're probably going to want a good idea on what happened there with the booster primarily. And apart from that, as long as that pad's held up well and we don't see any significant damage to it, I don't see why this couldn't be flying again pretty quickly. I'd probably be skeptical the same. I suspect there's probably still going to need to be a typical anomaly investigation, maybe with the booster, but I might be wrong on that.
Yeah, that was going to be sort of where I wanted to take the conversation next, which is what comes next. Start with you, Zack. I mean, having an opportunity to read through a good bit of the documents from both the FAA and FWS. Obviously, there will need to be a mishap investigation to really thoroughly learn what happened and allow the FAA to be comfortable with SpaceX going for flight number 3. Given that there wasn't the level of pad destruction, and more than likely we're not going to see sort of greater infrastructure upgrades needed to support another launch, just maybe some changes to the rocket itself. I know it's sort of speculative at this point, but what are you gauging as a possible or probable timeline before we could see this fly again?
Well, the infrastructure upgrades aren't necessarily needed, but as far as what we know, the stage 0 team has been sitting around waiting for probably about 2 to 3 months so they can start getting to work, because they have about 9 horizontal cryogenic storage tanks that should be installed here shortly. They're about to double the capacity of the tank farm as far as propellant loading speed. So they have currently, I think it's three liquid oxygen pumps and 2 liquid methane pumps, and they're going to be jumping up to 5 liquid oxygen and 4 methane pumps, and they're also adding in the additional heat exchangers for that as well too. So I think they're going to want to get those upgrades in as quickly as possible. They, like I said, have been waiting around to be able to do that. So I think that could be a limiting factor, like how quickly they're able to do that. But as far as the actual like ground testing campaign, we know that they're only going to do 2 static fires potentially, if even that, like at least 1 static fire for the booster. You know, the ground testing campaign should be way faster than it has been at any other, you know, from the first launch to this launch. I think it's not unrealistic for a month or 2, but as you were saying, you know, that mishap investigation or whatever is probably going to be the bigger limiting factor than infrastructure or the actual vehicle itself.
And
I think the great thing's been those engines, though, like those 33. NASA was there. We've already heard this. NASA was there to really make sure that they were improving on that reliability of the engines. And, you know, with the exception of the booster coming back there and starting to lose out, it just seems the launch itself was flawless, absolutely flawless as far as I can see.
Agreed. Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and Stephen, to bring it back into the conversation here, you know, really the FAA has been quite busy over the last year with a whole host of mishap investigations, whether you're talking about Blue Origin's New Shepard vehicle, obviously the big one with Starship. I think probably Terran 1 with Relativity Space is still in the works as far as we know. Given that a number of some of the larger mishap investigations are off the docket for the FAA, given the limitations of their workforce as it currently stands, unless Congress comes in and offers them more financial support, how much do you think some of the other investigations may hamper or hinder them being able to really get running with this one and really start to get to work and look towards another flight?
Oh, I think it'll go faster this time because I think the environmental piece of the review won't be as extensive if required at all, because as far as we can tell, we don't have eyes on the pad right up at the launch mount right now, but everything looks like it weathered the storm pretty well when this rocket lifted off. So they're not going to have to do any major modifications or changes out at the pad. So I think there still will be that safety review during that mishap investigation, but the environmental piece, which is what was holding up this license for the last number of weeks, month or 2, may not be required this time. So the FAA is obviously going to want to know, but if the FTS flight termination system was activated on both the booster and the ship, we know it was activated on the ship. It may have been activated on the booster. That's certainly going to require some scrutiny from the FAA. They're going to want to be involved in that mishap investigation. But I think it'll be primarily focused on the public safety and not the environmental aspects that were the final things that held up this launch date.
Yeah, that's the perfect answer, I think.
I was just going to ask, to that point, do you think that even though there's not the environmental component to this, that they may be able to step through it quickly, as it seemed, just looking at the mishap on New Shepard, obviously very different vehicle intended to be suborbital, but that mishap investigation, even though there didn't necessarily need to be a full environmental review on that one, but that one lasted well over a year before that one wrapped up. In your estimation, what do you think would allow this mishap investigation to move faster and hopefully get to a third flight of Starship by, somewhere in early 2024, if not, super late 23?
That's a good point, Will, about the New Shepard investigation taking so long. There's also the ABL investigation that took 8 months, I think 9 months actually, from January till October, I think is when that report came out. And but the most recent failure with Rocket Lab was an upper stage issue, and that has already been cleared, and that was less than 2 months. So maybe that's something to hang your hat on if you're SpaceX. Maybe that's the pace we'll see the mishap investigation go for this launch. But we'll see how things go. I know there's going to be a lot of pressure on the FAA from the public, from SpaceX, from space enthusiasts, SpaceX fans, and perhaps some interagency discussion between NASA and the FAA as well, because one thing we learned from SpaceX, we heard from SpaceX a few weeks ago, was SpaceX not only called for more resources for the FAA to be able to expedite these reviews and licensing, but they also called for there to be a way within the government for the FAA to prioritize programs that are of national importance, such as Starship for Artemis. So we'll see if there's any movement in that regard, to put this at the front of the line.
Yeah, and Marcus, that's a really good point. Obviously, we saw Bill Gerstenmaier up on Capitol Hill alongside colleagues from Blue Origin as well as Virgin Galactic talking about, principally the subcommittee hearing was over the regulations surrounding commercial human spaceflight, but SpaceX, and it was joined in by Blue and Virgin Galactic, really discussing and putting pressure on Congress to keep the wheels greased and moving along when it comes to the FAA going through these mishap investigations and trying to keep pace a little bit better with the pace of innovation. Obviously, it'll never be one-to-one because that's not how government works. But do you think, to Stephen's point, that given the importance of Starship, not only to SpaceX's individual ambitions as a singular company, but to the national interests as part of the Artemis architecture, that this may sort of scoot it up a little bit in the timeline of priority?
Yeah, look, the hope is always that it would be prioritized because it is critical for the Artemis missions in going forward, and they've got a long way to go. Getting to orbit's one tiny part of that. Refilling systems is the thing that I'm really quite interested in personally, because these these refilling systems in space are obviously required for any moon mission. And again, we don't have the numbers for the dry mass of this vehicle yet, and that's always going to be very handy for me to be able to see what the performance would be. How much delta V do they need? What sort of orbit do they need to be in before they could actually leave with a fully fueled ship? These are all really interesting questions. We just don't have the data to answer any of these questions or even speculate usefully on them. So what I really feel is that they will probably be accelerated through this process, especially since there's been as far as I can see, there's been no reasonable concerning damage at the site. A bit early to maybe make that claim, but I would think that they'll be very rapidly now getting the upgrades done to the tank farm with the new propellant turbines and whatnot. I think they'll be grabbing the next booster and ship in line, and they'll be testing them rapidly. And all that time, hopefully the FAA are doing any of the research investigations they need to do to allow the next one to fly. I think it'll probably all happen rapidly, but I would assume we're probably not going to see the next one until sometime January would be my guess, maybe February, but it depends. Yeah, it depends how quickly. I don't know. What's everyone else's thoughts?
Yeah, it all depends. Zack, as we've been talking about throughout the morning, obviously there's a lot of hardware stacked up. To Marcus's point, do you think, obviously once they do a full checkout of the pad and make sure that, the infrastructure is ready to support future testing, that we may see, some hardware start to get back into like full testing swing sooner rather than later? Or do you think it'll be a minute before we start seeing some of those next big milestones?
Well, given the way that they kind of push things with this launch, I would imagine that we may see something similar. Even with an investigation going, they'll probably have Booster 10 sitting on the pad with 2 static fires under its belt, and Elon tweeting out that they're ready for launch pending approval. So, I feel like the past has probably shown us what to expect in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, Booster 7's been I'm still stuck on Booster 7. Booster 10 has been in the Mega Bay getting its engines installed for probably the last month or so. So, I would not be surprised to see it roll out like literally before the end of the week. I mean, they're not going to mess around at all. I think we are still waiting on static fires for ship 28. So we don't really know if ship 28 or 26 is going to be the next launch vehicle, but as far as all indications that we've seen so far, it's going to be 28. So I would imagine they'll probably want to get going on the static fire campaign for ship 28. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I would not be surprised to see both vehicles on the pad by the end of this coming week.
Well, and
One
certainly
little thing that I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
Marcus.
I was going to say one little thing I wouldn't mind clarification on. I've got to go look through all the shots again, but how many heat shield tiles were sort of lost in the launch? Did we see many coming off? That's always a good question in my mind. And also, did we see many views from on board? Did we see any views from on board? I don't think we did we?
I will have to go back and look at the feed again. I want to say no, but I obviously don't want to be definitive until we've had a chance to really go back and check the tape. I'm just sort of scrubbing quickly through the live stream here.
Yeah, zero on board is what some of the people here are saying. So yeah, I didn't spot one. It's a bit hard to focus on everything when you're streaming, but
yeah,
apparently no shots. There was a single shot from Starship while it was on the pad, none in flight. So that's what I thought. I was a little bit interested by that, although I don't think we saw many from the actual last one either until after the fact. So we might see SpaceX tweet out a few shots of stage set cameras. I really hope they do.
I'm sure
because that'd be amazing. Yeah, that'd be amazing to see.
I mean, that was the biggest thing that they were watching and waiting for. So I can't imagine that they're not going to show that off now that they have it in a real world setting and not just the animation that they released this morning.
Yeah, that's been incredible.
I guess one sort of real world timeline that we can assess, and reaching out to one of our colleagues out in the field, Adam Bernstein, about the timeline for remote pickup. I mean, that'll be a good indication of how things are at the pad. Although it's taking a look out on the horizon, I do see convoy vehicles heading back out toward the production site. So it looks like teams are clear to start returning back to some level of normal operations at Starbase. So that's certainly a good indication that things are fairly nominal at the launch site.
Yeah.
We're just taking a look at the launch replay here on your screen.
How many tiles are missing there?
You see at least one dot that could potentially be a missing tile, but it's really hard to tell at vantage point. Hopefully when SpaceX releases some onboard views, there are cameras that are pointing up at ship and not just down at the booster.
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of see while they dim those cameras, they sort of reduce the exposure, trying to see what's going on with all the engines. But yeah, it was doesn't let you see much about the ship itself, does it?
No, it doesn't. Well, as we go ahead and start to wind down our coverage, going to go ahead and let some of the fellows go as we start to pack things in. So want to thank our guests that have joined us on this stream. Really appreciate the time, the insight, and the great commentary from Marcus House, Zack Golden, and Stephen Clark. Before you fellas depart, if you want to just talk briefly about where folks can keep up with all your great work and maybe talk about a project that you've got on the horizon. Marcus, we'll start with you and go to Zack and then Stephen.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for those that aren't familiar with me, I run a channel where we really just try to cover the weekly snapshot, everything great that happened this week, and we did release those on a Saturday. So single video, typically try to do them 20 minutes long and just try to cover everything fairly concisely. So that's our goal, and trying to make it reasonably technical, but also reasonably basic for those that are a bit new to it. But yeah, it's all just under my name. Google Marcus House, and you'll find me there on YouTube. Absolute pleasure. We're sort of just excruciatingly close to 500,000 subscribers, and I can't quite get there. So yes, anybody that's not subscribed that likes watching what we do, we are right there. But yes, thank you very much for the invite. It's been awesome being here, and seeing all the people in chat from all around the world. Just amazing. It amazes me, this community. It really does. Every time I get to be a part of anything live like this. So yeah, thank you everybody, and thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been talking throughout the morning about the importance of reaching folks throughout the space community, those that are just sort of passing interest, as well as those who are very deep in the weeds and want to know all the technical aspects of the mission. So it's good to have a great diversity of channels, and those like Marcus House are great if you really want to get into the weeds. And as he mentioned, tick off the news of the week. So thanks, Marcus. Going down the horn, Zack Golden with CSI Starbase. Talk a little about the work that you do on your channel, and maybe some of the maybe the next video that you've got in the loop. Obviously, I'm sure something very much connected to this launch.
For sure. Yeah. I'm like you said, Zack Golden. I pretty active on both Twitter and well, more Twitter right now than YouTube currently. Got some life changes that have been happening, but I really like to kind of cover all of the ins and outs of what's happening, like from a engineering perspective, and tons of speculation. So you'll see lots of speculation from me on Twitter if you follow CSI Starbase on Twitter. But as far as on YouTube, I like to do a lot of in-depth analysis and really try and explain how everything works, because we don't get a lot of information from SpaceX. So I try to really analyze things as in-depth as possible, and with the help of a lot of really amazing 3D artists, and obviously none of the stuff I do would be possible without all the photographers on the ground and the live stream cameras and all that stuff. So currently I'm working on a decently long episodes, probably about 45 minutes long, just covering all of the changes that they made with Booster 9 and Ship 25. So it's actually a 2-part episode. We got some really awesome renders and animations for that as well too, because we can say on the live stream that they upgraded the shielding, but you can't really actually get an appreciation for what that looks like until we are able to actually model all that stuff and really show people what was actually changed. So we're pretty deep into that process. I was actually kind of hoping to get it out yesterday, but obviously I'm down here, so hopefully be on the lookout for that within the next 2 days or so. I'm about to head back home here in a few hours and get to work on that right away. So yeah, if you guys haven't followed me on or subscribed on YouTube, make sure you do that. Same name on both platforms, CSI Starbase. And I appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate being able to be on the actual stream and cover history in the making. So hopefully I'll be here on the next one as well too. It's just gonna only get more exciting each time.
Well, and it's great to be able to keep coming back, because then we have a reference point, both from just watching it in the stream, but there's something very palpable about being in person. So I think that's important to, as much as and as often as we can, make sure that we are live in person, bringing you our experiences, as well as building on our own knowledge of what these rockets are like. And there's some things that you can capture much better if you can get a 3D world perspective on it. So thanks to Zack. Again, if you're not subscribed to both him and Marcus House, be sure to do so on YouTube. And lastly, our Spaceflight Now alumnus, Stephen Clark, joining us again. Very busy over at Ars Technica. Jet setting quite a bit these days. You were just over in Colorado talking on another tiled vehicle, the Dream Chaser from Sierra Space. Briefly, just talk about that trip down there. Obviously, there's a lot happening in space flight, and that's a big one that is also important to NASA.
Yeah, exactly. I was up in the Denver area a few weeks ago to see the first Dream Chaser named Tenacity as it was getting ready to leave the factory, heading from Colorado to NASA's Plum Brook test facility in Ohio, where it's going to go through some thermal vacuum testing and some electromagnetic testing over the next couple of months. And then once those tests are done, if they're successful, Sierra Space is going to be shipping that vehicle down to Cape Canaveral to prepare for launch on the second flight of United Launch Alliance's Vulcan rocket. And that's going to be happening probably no earlier than the spring, but we'll see if Vulcan and Dream Chaser are ready. It's kind of a tight schedule, I think, for both of those vehicles to be ready for a second flight in the April timeframe. And so that certainly is an interesting thing to see a space plane in the factory about to leave its nest, heading up to the test facility. And it's going to be really cool to see it land. Even more cool than the launch, I think, will be to see it land back at the Kennedy Space Center on the old shuttle landing facility. And speaking of space planes, another thing, if we're talking about what's coming up, is the launch of the X-37 on the Falcon Heavy in less than a month from the Cape. That's the first flight of the Air Force Space Force X-37 on a Falcon Heavy. So it's led to a lot of speculation about what it's going to be doing on flying on a much bigger rocket than the Atlas V or Falcon 9. I think we'll certainly figure out what kind of orbit it's going into closer to the launch. Once the notice to pilots and mariners come out, we'll have an idea of where it's going to be going. But what it's going to do, who knows? The military doesn't like talking about that. And so that's something else on my horizon, along with preparations for a third Starship flight test. Hope to be back here for that. I would bet it's going to be early next year, but we'll see. And also the first flight of Vulcan on Christmas Eve. So it's going to be a very busy holiday season for space reporters.
It certainly is. So if you wanted the present of space flight, we've certainly got a wealth of that for you on tap. And that Falcon Heavy Pad 39A really very quickly in process, turning over from Falcon 9 configuration to a Falcon Heavy. Still the only pad that SpaceX is launching heavies off of. So they're preparing to take some of the crude and cargo capabilities off the exclusive load of 39A. Looking forward to possibly our first flight with the AX3 crew, maybe in January. We might see that, hopefully.
Yeah, that's another thing I didn't mention is first crew launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station since 1966, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since the last Gemini flight. So launching astronauts from Pad 40 will be really cool to see as well. So yeah, like I said, lots going on, and you can keep track of it with my writing at arstechnica.com. Spaceflight Now, of course, does a great job as well. So plenty of resources to learn about all these things that are coming up.
Awesome. Well, thanks again to Steven, Zach, and Marcus for joining us throughout, I would say, some pretty banner coverage. Want to go ahead, bring Lab back in as we begin to close out this conversation. Really haven't had the chance to sit down, you and I, since we really got this thing going. Just briefly, what were your overall impressions of the flight profile and what we saw, what we didn't see, and what you're looking forward to on the next one?
Well, I think we all saw what we wanted to see today. We saw that thing take off. We saw it separate. And unfortunately, it didn't make it all the way around to Hawaii. But overall, I think it was a very good, successful day today for SpaceX. We did lose a camera, a Rover 3 cam. I'm not sure exactly why, if it was just a net connection or if we lost it due to any heat. I know there's a lot of heat out there, but yeah, man, it was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the combo of LabPadre Spaceflight Now, we were able to bring a great experience to our viewers around the world. So it's been a pleasure working with you guys, as we have for quite some time now.
Yes, sir.
Do have a few more super chats to go through if you want to tackle those with me as we get ready to wrap things up. But of course, want to acknowledge the folks that have been supporting us. So we'll pass it back and forth as we thank some of you who have been supporting us throughout the course of this operation.
Yes, sir. We got Sharpie in with $10 super chat for all the work you do, LabPadre. Thank you, Sharpie.
Moving on down the road, SG, one of our regulars, joining us for live launch coverage with a $40 super chat. No comments here, but SG just likes to come in with the support, and we really appreciate that. Good to see you as always.
Wow, we have $199.99 USD super chat. Let's go. Thanks for your hard work. That's Bond Urch. Thank you very much for that generous super chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bond Urch. Really appreciate the support. Moving on down, Sven Lutgemeyer. Apologies if I mispronounced that, but with a €5 Super Chat says, thanks for all your great streams over to LabPadre, and you guys do some great work.
All right. And we have Calum. He's one of our camera operators for the Gator Cam out at Port Canaveral. 10 pounds, pound sterling, root beer for commentators to wet their whistles. Thank you, Calum.
Yeah, I'm certainly a mug root beer fan myself, so I think a tall, frosty glass of root beer sounds pretty nice right about now.
Yes, sir.
And we've been using our voices quite a bit.
Yeah.
Moving on down, JK Video with a $10 Super Chat donation. Thank you so much, JK.
And we have Alan Hart in the house, $49.99. Love the addition of House and Golden to broadcast team. Yes, we love Zack and Marcus House. Love to have them as part of our commentary.
And wasn't part of this particular comment, but also getting to bring Stephen Clark into the fold was definitely a treat. So appreciate him being with us as well. Mutinous Mike with a 10-pound sterling donation. Go Starship, and it sure did go.
Yeah. All right, we have Jim Edgar with $30. Jim Edgar and Lisa Bean have been up all morning in Seattle for the launch. Thank you, Jim, for Jim and Lisa for hanging out with us this morning. Glad y'all got to see what we got to see. What a day.
I know my mom, I made sure she knew when the stream was starting. It was going to be an early morning. She's also on the West Coast in California, so hopefully the launch was enjoyed by folks up and down the West Coast of the United States and around the world as well. Net Lawyer DC with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Net Lawyer. Really appreciate you being with us this morning and for your support.
All right, we have Martha Johnson with $20 super chat. Fly high, Starship. Yes, she did fly. Thank you so much, Martha.
Moving on down here, Kanjo Dan 69 with a $25 super chat. Simple message, but a pertinent one. Let's go.
All right, we have George Nicholas in the house with £49.99 sterling. Great coverage, guys. Thanks also to Marcus for dropping his weekly a day early. Thank you, George.
John Doan with a $20 super chat. This obviously coming in before liftoff or right about liftoff, saying time to rock and roll. And boy, you know, this was the first time I saw Starship launch in person, and I will say that the rocking was certainly well earned by this rocket.
Yes, sir, John. Thank you very much. Also known as Hank Hill, my brother from another mother down on South Padre Island. Thank you very much, John. And we have Shill Herdinex Dan.
I think it's a School of Hard Knocks.
Oh, School of, okay, there we go.
It together.
Okay, School of Hard Knocks Dan. I never put that together. I've been seeing him for quite some time. Thank you, Will. $25 US. Thank you for the front row seats, Lab. You're most welcome, School of Hard Knocks Dan.
And we have Conservative Space Nerd with a less than conservative $20 super chat donation. Says officially the largest rocket launched now, right? Well, yeah, I guess since they added the hot staging ring, it's a little bit taller than the last time they launched the integrated Starship. So yes, it would be now the largest rocket ever launched.
We'll take it.
Thank you, Space Nerd.
All right, we have Sasha Shakalova, $20 US. So very close, and yet so far, the launch, the hot stage, all in place. This show was grand, the ship, the start. Too bad the show was lost in space. Thank you, Sasha. Yeah, she likes to give us some little poems every now and then on the live streams. Much love, Sasha.
Well, and having the name Will Robinson Smith, I will forever be linked to Lost in Space. So I will appreciate that one just in my heart. Thank you, Sasha. Mark Kidwell, $20 super chat. Says, great job. Thanks for your commentary, and thanks to Lab for all his efforts in bringing this to us.
You're most welcome, Mark. Thank you. All right, we got Josh King with $9.99 USD. Definitely much better than the last flight. Congratulations to SpaceX. Go Starship. Yes, sir.
And thank you to Josh for being one of our channel members. Appreciate that additional support as well. HK with a $5 super chat, which it looks like I skipped and went by really fast. Apologies, HK, but thank you so much for your support. Really, really appreciate you being with us this morning.
All right, we got Don Rubottom with $19.99 US dollars. Thanks for all you do, LabPadre. Well, thank you for hanging out with us and be a part of our community, Don.
Landa Kahau with a $5 US super chat says, incredible work, guys, and hello, Marcus House. Love the great camera shots and the commentary of this amazing historical event. Keep up the great work. We certainly will. There's still lots more launch excitement left in 2023, and we're looking forward to bringing it all to you.
All right, we have SG. I think that's the second time we might have seen him today. $5 US. Thank you very much, SG.
SG is a silent donor. Not typically one to leave a comment, but really appreciate the support. SG is always a reliable partner coming in the chat. And speaking of being a great partner, AV Will with a very generous $50 super chat. Simple message. Great job.
Well, thank you very much. All right, we have Mel Roberts Harold with $1.99 USD. Doggone, missed this one. Oh, so sorry, Mel. Wish you could have watched it, but I'm sure we'll have it on a replay here.
Yeah, Mel is one of our regulars on the live streams, and she's very diligent, bouncing back and forth between the Cape as well as up in Chicago. So maybe in transit on the way for Thanksgiving obligations. So yeah, Mel, we'll have between our channels lots of replay opportunities. So be sure to check back for that. Son of Sofa Man with a $25 super chat just says, thanks for the great coverage and thanks for supporting us in this effort. Really appreciate that, Son of Sofa Man.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking forward to hitting a sofa soon because it's been a long night and morning between Starlink in the midnight hours and getting ready for this, but it's been fun. This is why we do it.
All right, we got Jolly Roger with $5 USD. Keep the root beer safe. It's always safe. I think it's time to get a keg this time.
The root beer taps, they will be a-flowing. Mel with another $5 super chat says, still appreciate y'all working to bring these to us. Certainly happy to do that, Mel, and I know we'll be back before you know it. As a matter of fact, there is a Vandenberg Starlink launch later on today, so no rest for the weary.
Oh,
got
you have
more mission on tap.
You have your hands full.
The fun never stops.
As I think we were saying earlier, as far as Florida time, this is going to be your third launch in one day.
Yeah, just after midnight, 8 o'clock on the East Coast, and I think the Vandenberg launch is around, I have to double check, I think it's 8 o'clock-ish on the West Coast. So what would that be, about 11 p.m. Eastern time? So really, really stretching the full length of that 24 hours SpaceX is.
All right, we have Roy in the house with $2. Thank you, Roy, for hanging out with us. It looks like you're one of Spaceflight Now's guys.
Master Race 1000 with a 900. Do you recognize that?
I don't recognize that one.
It was called that a 900 donation. Thanks you for, it says, great launch, great commentary. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a fun live stream.
Yes, sir. All right, we have Tex Drinkwater, $5. Thanks for the great coverage as always. Thank you for your generous support.
And with that last one, I believe that is all of the super chats for now. Whew, it has been quite the banner morning. Really, really notching another piece of history, as Stephen was saying earlier. It feels very much like the era of Starship is not 100% firmly here because we haven't seen them launch a payload yet, but they're well on their way.
Oh yeah, and judging by what we see at the launch pad right now, not a lot of damage. I did see some debris fly, maybe even some debris that was glowing a little bit on Rover 2 cam. But overall, I don't think we had much damage. And with that being said, I think we're going to see something here in early 2024.
Certainly hope so. Obviously, we'll keep tabs with both SpaceX and the FAA as this mishap investigation gets underway and they process any updates that need to be made to the Starship vehicle that aren't already in work. Did have a couple super chats as we were chatting just now. Thanks to, I love this name, great reference to Jurassic Park there. Clever girl. With a 20 Australian dollar donation says, "Thank you, LabPadre and Spaceflight Now for the coverage. We'll never forget this moment in spaceflight history." And
Thank you,
being this
clever girl.
my first Starship launch, I won't forget it, certainly.
I bet you won't. All right, Run Crazy Dog, $20. Great coverage. Starship, go for orbit. Well, we almost got there, but maybe next time. Thanks, Run Crazy Dog.
Yeah, as we were, talking in the round robin chat, it'll be interesting to see, once SpaceX is ready to go for its third fully integrated Starship flight, if they do decide to repeat this flight profile, or if they, make the call and decide, to try for an orbital mission.
Yeah, like as I was saying before earlier, is with the mishap happening offshore, I don't think there's going to be as much of an investigation as there was this time around with so much debris last time. I really think we're going to see something sooner than later.
Well, we will keep tabs on all of that as this Starship program progresses. And thanks to all of you who have been with us throughout the course of some banner launch coverage. Want to go back and thank some of the people that were working very hard behind the scenes to make this all possible. Thanks to Lucid, Rusty Buckets, video producer and lead admin, respectively, on LabPadre's side. Chief, who's been on the roof of the Sapphire with Spaceflight Now's Adam Bernstein, doing some great launch photography. Be sure to keep up with their social media profiles, as well as LabPadre and Spaceflight Now for launch photos, as well as some of our commentators who were on. I know Stephen Clark already posted a great photo from his telephoto lens. You can see the 33 Raptor engines burning bright as they ascended over the Gulf of Mexico. So lots of great launch photography to check out throughout the next several hours in the coming days. Also want to give a big shout out to our moderators who have been monitoring the live chat, the camera operators who've been keeping tabs and everything, Sapphire Commons, Isla Grand Beach Resort, of course, Stephen Young, who unfortunately wasn't able to be with us in person here for this one, but has been instrumental as the man in the chair, making sure all the camera views were going into the feed, going out to you, and that this operation was working on a technical level from Florida. Obviously, LabPadre for supporting a lot of the technical aspects with the internet and power here. Obviously couldn't do that without those, and having all the camera infrastructure that you guys have. And thanks to you, Lab. It's been really fun, working with you remotely from Florida and getting little peeks into Starbase, but getting to build out this live coverage today has just been it's been a real treat, working towards this launch opportunity and now getting to the moment of truth.
Yeah, I really appreciate y'all coming out and working with us. It was a pleasure having you, and I'm glad you got to see this Starship launch here. Tell me what you think about the Rumble, man. What was the difference between the Falcon Heavies and Falcon 9s? Was there a big difference?
Oh, there's a world of difference between both of the Falcon vehicles. I think the closest that I can even compare to this would have been a Space Launch System rocket for the Artemis 1 mission. Just because it had those two solid rocket boosters with the 5 segments on each side and the 4 RS-25 engines at the bottom. I mean, that was about as much impact as I felt before today. We were still, about the distance we are at the press site from the pad. And my goodness, I don't know if it was just the sheer power of the Starship launch vehicle and the Super Heavy booster, or if it was, the wind it and just the right conditions, so it felt as big as it appeared to. But having been on here for the last few days, getting a lot of video close up, walking around as much of the rocket as we could to get some views before this thing lifted off. And SpaceX has a really incredible launch vehicle on their hands, and it's an important entrant both for them as well as for NASA. perhaps someday with DoD, as we see, Earth, ship cargo transfers from one side of the globe to another. I think there are a lot of possibilities with the Starship program, and it's a really important part of the overall launch architecture as one of the big Methalox vehicles that's now flying, and looking forward to seeing some of the others come online. Obviously, Terranar will be another big one that we're looking to see debut probably in a couple of years. So yeah, no, this was quite an experience.
Yeah, and going back to the sheer power and the sound that we had here, I think it was actually a little bit louder this time than it was back in April. The wind was kind of pushing to the north, to the northwest last time. This time it was a little still. We had a little precipitation in the air, so that kind of makes the sound travel a little more. I think I felt my chest rumble a little harder this time than back in April, and I loved it.
Yeah, no, it was quite something. Certainly something I will never forget. And I know we talked to a lot of people for whom they may have wanted to come for the first integrated flight test, weren't able to make it out. Great family that I spoke to yesterday, originally from South Africa. Father bringing his 7-year-old daughter out for her first launch, and he's seen a couple, but it was seeing families like that, with the launch delay from yesterday to today, getting the opportunity to see flight hardware up close. And there's really nothing like that moment of inspiration, especially for kids, in getting to see something so impressive, both on a technical as well as just a visual perspective, that you're going to see launch, less than 24 hours from when they saw it yesterday. And, I think these are great moments of inspiration for, future scientists, researchers, whether they go into the aerospace industry or any other technical field. I think as much opportunity as we can give the next generation to experience launches like the one we saw here, missions from the Cape, from Wallops Island, Virginia, from Vandenberg Space Force Base. I think these are all really great moments to show what we're capable of when we try to do some really big things. If I may be so bold as to quote Bill Nelson and do a quick impression, space is the place. And
yes, it is.
There's a lot to account for that. So I think the teams have to be really proud of what they accomplished and what's still on the horizon.
Yes, sir. Talking about the children, we have a lot of teachers in classrooms that tap into our live streams every now and then for science classes and stuff. And I think it's a great opportunity for these kids to learn and be able to get so close to this right on the side of the road. I think it's wonderful that SpaceX allows them to get so close. And I believe they also have some little private little meetings with them that they let them come through and check things out in the production facility. Special shout out to SpaceX for that.
Yeah, and there are NASA installations and private aerospace companies all around the country that are doing similar things, and it's important to reach into places like Stephen was just mentioning, Tenacity, the Dream Chaser space plane from Sierra Space, now going to Ohio. Obviously there are facilities all around the country. You've got Stennis in Mississippi, Michoud down in Louisiana. You've got Ames, the Jet Propulsion Lab, and that's not to say anything about all the other launch companies. I mean, you just look up in Pittsburgh, where they have the Moonshot Museum, where you have a glass pane looking into the clean room for Astrobotic, where up until a couple of weeks ago, you could see the Peregrine lunar lander that's going to be flying on the first Vulcan launch. And right now they've, got views inside as they work on the Griffin lander, which will launch the Viper mission for NASA in late 2024. So like you were saying, having all of these unique opportunities around the country and increasingly around the globe to bring people that are maybe not necessarily currently in aerospace, maybe will never be in aerospace, but just to get a chance to experience, what may seem far beyond reach in one sense, but really, the opportunity is all around us, and it can be a great moment to inspire some young people. So it's cool to see.
Yeah, and even some older people, and for instance, my wife, she's not really into space and in rockets and stuff, but after she witnessed her first launched back here in 2020 with a SN8. It rocked her world. She can't get enough of it now.
There's nothing like the first time you see a launch in person to just, you know, proverbially light a fire under you.
Just like the very first time.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
All right, and folks, that is going to be it for us. It's been quite an eventful morning. Really appreciate all of you who have taken the time to be with us and hear from our commentators again. Thanks to the folks who joined us, Zack Golden, Marcus House, Stephen Clark, you know, all the great folks at LabPadre, the team with Spaceflight Now, Sapphire Condominiums, Isla Grand Beach Resort. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, it takes a village to do robust launch commentary like this. And so we really thank you for all of our channel members that power what we do at its core, for all the YouTube super chats that came in, providing some day of support. We can't do these launch broadcasts without, you know, all of you pitching in to make it happen. So really appreciate you being with us and helping us to do this. And we look forward to coming back for the third launch of Starship whenever it does go up. And there's plenty of space coverage to be happening for, you know, the rest of this year and looking into 2024. So for all of us here at LabPadre and Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Really appreciate you joining us this morning. Be good to yourself, be good to others, and as always, we will see you next time.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Will. And I also wanted to give a special shout out to my right-hand man, Phil, the Whiz Kid, that has helped me out through everything that we're doing out here. And, you know, even not during the launches, he helps me out with everything out here on site. And I'd like to once again thank everybody for hanging out with us and watching this stream with us. It was a pleasure hosting and having you all. Also, I didn't get to also thank Zack and Marcus House and Stephen Clark for being with us. And of course, Stephen Young, once again, for making it happen behind the scenes. And with that, LabPadres shutting her down and out.